Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yamin of Revolution, and revolution is a way of life. Revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got some late night revolutionary dinner for y'all. But before we get into this World War III alert, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, the hardest working revolutionary in the business is here. Salute, Queen. I got off late, but just because I get off late don't mean y'all don't deserve y'all geopolitical information, and I'm here to do my duty. So let's get into it. It seems like, we tomorrow when y'all dealing with Turkey Day, we really don't get into too much into the celebration of mass murder and killing and all that, but we will be celebrating family. But it seems like the small hats and those in charge, they don't want y'all to celebrate with y'all family. Salute. They want us all dead. And they playing very dangerous games with our life. So forget about tomorrow when they talking about they appreciate your family tomorrow. Appreciate your loved ones. Call some family members up you haven't talked to in a while. I'm telling you, don't call some people you haven't talked to in a while and let them know that you love them and you miss them. Because I don't know how many days we have left. This is very serious. So let's get into this. Because Putin warned them that he will be striking NATO facilities. Not he might. He said he will be doing that real soon.
A few hours ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially announced that in the last 72 hours, the Ukrainian army had attacked the Kursk region twice, with the help of Western long-range missiles. Moreover, for the first time in the entire period of hostilities, the Russian Defense Ministry officially recognized the hit of important military facilities on the territory of the Russian Federation.
Okay, so let's understand what we see. They trying to distract us with a ceasefire. These people think they slick. These people use the media to manipulate people into, P. Diddy didn't get his bond. His bond was denied. Fuck P. Diddy. We want to know about World War III. There ain't no peace in the Middle East. Stop lying about any peace agreement. This is what we need to be talking about. Oh, you say you attacked Russia again. Oh, you say you used the missiles Putin told you don't use. Oh, and this time you actually hit it for military facility? Some Russian soldiers was injured? Oh, that's why Putin is saying he's not threatening. He's not saying he might. Oh, that's why he's saying he definitely will be hitting NATO. Wait a minute. Ain't America NATO?
In particular, General Igor Konashenkov officially confirmed that on November 23rd, the enemy, with the help of 5 American ATACMS ballistic missiles, struck the positions of the S-400 anti-aircraft missile division near the settlement of Lodorevka in the Kursk region. According to him, during this attack, the mobile self-propelled surface-to-air anti-aircraft system Panzer S-1 managed to shoot down 3 American missiles. However, the remaining 2 missiles reached their targets, as a result of which the radar station was damaged and several Russian servicemen were injured of varying severity. On November 25th, the enemy attacked the Kursk region again, this time with the help of 8 American ATACMS ballistic missiles. It is reported that a missile strike was carried out on the Kursk-Vostochny airfield, in the village of Kalino. During this attack, the S-400 and Panzer S-1 air defense systems managed to shoot down 7 American ballistic missiles. Unfortunately, 1 missile still managed to reach its target, causing minor damage to infrastructure facilities. Later, the official representative of the Russian military department added that the Ministry of Defense is in full control of the situation, and that Russia is currently preparing a plan of retaliatory actions. The world expert community was shocked by this official message from the Russian military department. In particular, authoritative military expert and journalist Alexei Sokonkin said that the Russian Defense Ministry has never made such loud statements regarding retaliatory strikes against enemy forces. According to him, all this indicates that information preparations are underway before our eyes for some kind of loud and ruinous ultimatum against the West and its puppets in Kiev. My dear truth seekers, given the fact that in his recent speech, Vladimir Putin personally promised Moscow's enemies a tough retaliatory strike if they continue to attack Russian territory, then there is no doubt that at this moment, Moscow is really preparing an unpleasant surprise for Ukraine and NATO countries. Former National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, John Bolton, also did not stand aside and comment on the current situation. In particular, he expressed concern about the future fate of Ukraine. According to him, by escalating the conflict, Joe Biden pursued two goals: to preserve his own reputation and make things harder for Donald Trump, who promised to resolve the military conflict in Ukraine within 24 hours. To be honest, I'm not sure why they do that. Western missiles will not change the situation on the battlefield. Most likely, they are doing this to preserve their reputation and will not allow Trump to end this conflict within 24 hours. It is obvious to everyone that after the Ukrainian army began to fire deep into Russian territory with the help of Western long-range missiles, Donald Trump will not be able to resolve this conflict very quickly. In this regard, I have concerns about the future fate of Ukraine, former National Security Advisor to the President of the United States John Bolton said. Commenting on the statement of the Russian military department, an authoritative military analyst, advisor to the Russian Academy of Missile and Artillery Sciences, candidate of Historical Sciences, Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Oleg Ivanikov, bluntly stated that the upcoming Russian retaliatory strike would be a big and unpleasant surprise for NATO and Pentagon generals. Citing his own sources in the Russian military department, Oleg Ivanikov said that in addition to the hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik, Russia has several types of fifth-generation weapons systems, which are much more deadly and dangerous than the latest Orshnik. These latest weapons systems use artificial intelligence and nanotechnology. I believe that Russia will not use the hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik this time. I am confident that Russia will use one of its latest experimental weapons with artificial intelligence and nanotechnology to retaliate, which will be a complete surprise to Western generals who continue to push Ukraine to certain death, Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Oleg Ivanikov said. The fact that on November 27, Moscow officially announced the closure of the airspace over the Kapustin Yar test site in the Astrakhan region indicates that Russia is indeed preparing to launch the latest missile previously unknown to anyone. Moreover, abnormally high radiation from the world's most powerful electronic warfare system Murmansk BM is recorded in the area of this test site, as a result of which even the most powerful NATO satellites go blind while flying above this military facility. All this is done so that the West cannot see and take a picture of the latest Russian fifth-generation experimental weapons systems. Commenting on the upcoming Russian retaliatory strike, independent Western military experts and analysts expressed confidence that the latest Russian missiles will hit important NATO facilities in Ukraine, decision-making centers, weapons factories, and logistics hubs, such as seaports, railways, and runways. Against this backdrop, insiders in Kiev report that the military political leadership of Ukraine is in a state of high stress, in anticipation of a crushing Russian missile strike. Insiders claim that Vladimir Zelensky and other representatives of the Kiev regime do not leave the underground bunkers for the second day.
Stop hiding, Zelensky.
Moreover, on November 27, an air alert was declared in Ukraine due to the threat of a ballistic missile strike. The Ukrainian General Staff officially stated that means of reconnaissance allegedly recorded the launch of a ballistic missile in Russia. However, 2 hours later, the Ukrainian military department denied this information, stating that it was a false alarm. All this indicates that Ukraine is very nervous and worried in anticipation of a Russian retaliatory strike. Well, my dear truth seekers, given the fact that Washington, Paris, and London have officially declared that the launch of the latest Russian hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik will not change the West's political and military course in the Ukrainian conflict, I believe that Putin should hit and destroy enemy military facilities not only in Ukraine, but also in NATO countries. Only in this case, Western leaders will be afraid and stop escalating the conflict.
See, this is biblical. See, Putin knew their heart would be hardened, like the story of Pharaoh. This has to happen to these wicked people. He didn't want you to listen. He wanted to do what he got to do to you. He just wanted to
I am sure that further missile strikes only on Ukraine will not give any results, since the West does not care about this country. I am sure that only the destruction of one of the NATO bases on the territory of Poland, Romania, Britain, Germany, or England will frighten the Western warmongers, and they will finally stop and refuse to undergo further escalation of the conflict.
You see, these psychopaths is playing dangerous games with our lives, y'all. You know, and I don't, I'm hearing Joe Biden trying to sneak 23 billion to Ukraine. They need to let the American people know it's not about money. We can give Ukraine $500 billion. They don't have people to fight. That's why NATO is being killed in Russia. That's why NATO is being captured. British soldiers, American soldiers is dying. That's a fact. That's all over TV. We just showed that shit. Ukraine, this is really getting sick. They forcing these people to the slaughter so they can steal those resources. And people have spoken that they don't want no Ukrainian men. This is how they is. They want action at they women. Now they women to be subservient to other men from other nations. This is crazy, but this is true. What they doing in Ukraine?
Trump's victory in the US has sent shockwaves across the globe, but perhaps nowhere more profoundly than in Ukraine. For Kyiv soldiers who have been fighting a prolonged war with Russia, news has cast a dark shadow over their hopes and resolve. Winters are coming, but perhaps they are now more worried about Trump. Such is the crisis that troops are now more open to surrendering land to Russia just to survive. Russian forces are advancing at a pace never seen before, particularly in the Donbas region. Reports from the Russian Defense Ministry highlight that multiple settlements in Donetsk and Kharkov have fallen under Russian control. This constant pressure has drained both manpower and morale from Ukraine's forces. Now, The Economist has reported that the Ukrainian army is struggling to meet its conscription targets. Many recruits are older, unhealthy, and unmotivated. One officer lamented that the army is long out of willing recruits. They are not ready to fight Russia now. This paints a grim picture, an army struggling to hold its ground while grappling with internal challenges. Troops who once had a strong will to fight are now more hesitant. One Kyiv officer noted, "It's not even 50-50 anymore, but 30-70, referring to the faltering resolve to fight to the end. Morale among Ukrainian soldiers is collapsing, and for obvious reasons. There is relentless combat, no breaks, minimal rotation, and little hope of reinforcements. The pressure to stay alive is immense. The only way out of this mess seems to be peace or talks with Russia. The harsh reality is that many soldiers now see this as a way to ensure their survival. In October, reports surfaced of over 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers deserting or leaving their posts since the conflict escalated 2 years back. Videos circulating on social media show scenes of desperation, recruitment officers forcibly conscripting men in public places, often leading to violent brawls. These images reveal only one harsh reality. Ukraine is struggling to maintain its fighting force. Trump's return to the White House has come as a double whammy. His stance on NATO and Ukraine has been clear. EU countries must increase their defense spending or risk being left to fend for themselves. Trump has even suggested that if NATO members do not meet his demands, he might allow Russia to do whatever the hell it wants with them. This has sent a chilling message to Ukraine and its allies. Without strong support from the United States, Ukraine's ability to continue the war is in serious jeopardy. President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned of dire consequences if US military aid is cut off. He has stated bluntly that without congressional support, Ukraine will lose the war. This warning is not just rhetoric. Ukraine relies heavily on Western support for weapons, ammunition, and financial aid. If the US pulls back, other European nations might struggle to fill the gap, especially given the political and economic challenges within the EU. Let's be honest, EU does not have pockets as deep as the US. For Kiev soldiers on the front lines, Trump's victory feels like a dead end. The war has already tested their patience, their endurance to the breaking point, and now, with the potential loss of US support, the future feels even bleaker. The prospect of surrendering land to Russia, once unthinkable, now seems like a lifeline. It is a grim trade off, land for lives.
On November 27, 2020. Morning report on November 27, 2024. Ukrainian military resources published a very alarming report for Kiev about the new successes of the Russian armed forces in Karahovo and its environs. Despite attempts to transfer reserves from the western outskirts of the city, the situation of Ukrainian garrison continues to deteriorate amid the presence of Russian assault troops in the city center, developing attacks on high-rise buildings. In one corner of the storming, UAV crew of the Yug group of forces from Southern Military District discovered an observation post and a firing position of Ukrainian ATGM Stugna on the upper floor of one of the city buildings. Nothing could hide from the drone, immediately destroying them all, before the ATGM had time to be used. According to some Ukrainian sources, Kiev regime forbade General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine to give orders to retreat even from the encircled settlements, and tried to hold positions at the cost of heavy losses. However, the 119th Territorial Defense Brigade of Ukraine serving in the vicinity of Karahovo, in Berezhki, apparently did not care about Kiev's orders. They chose to flee in disarray and suffered losses in small groups of 3 to 5 people through the forest belt after seeing the loss of Berezhki. Meanwhile, another group was captured by Russian troops. They looked very happy to be captured because they would be safe from the war. Their uniforms looked new. Russia has reportedly gained 235 square kilometers of territory in the past week, in the strategic city of Karahovo in Donetsk, the fastest pace of progress since early 2022.
significance militarily and geopolitically, and I know your field is geopolitics, not military, of the Russian Oreshnik missile. How big a deal is this?
It is a big deal for itself and also for what it tells us about us. The most important features of the Oreshnik were already on view in 2018 in the Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile, which had in its nose cone 12 avant-garde hypersonic missiles. The same principle as we see in Oreshnik. Oreshnik has 6 hypersonic blocks, they call them, which are individually targeted and which coast down to their target at 10 Mach, 10 times the speed of sound. The 2018 ICBM had 20 Mach avant-garde missiles aboard. The real technical challenge, as far as I understand, was to fly in those hypersonic blocks or the MIRV missiles that are part of the delivery package at these enormous speeds and to control them for precise targeting. This was the enormous achievement of Russian physicists and engineers for 2018. It was overlooked completely by us in the West. It was explained to the public on the March 1st, 2018 speech to the nation, the State of the Nation address, as we like to call it, that Putin delivered then, which was about a month before the presidential elections. And it was made light of by our press and by our experts who spoke about it as a bluff, as a pre-electoral empty speech by a man who was very keen to be re-elected, Vladimir Putin. But the fact that the Russians could have, as Putin later explained, done something that they had not achieved in 70 years of the Soviet Union, pulled ahead of the United States technologically in arms. We know that they pulled ahead of the United States in Sputnik when it was launched, but not in the arms race. There, the United States was always years ahead, going back to who had the first nuclear weapons. Here, in this case, Russia pulled a whole generation ahead of the United States, and maybe as much as 10 years ahead. 10 years in politics is forever. What's important about the Oreshnik, and very few of my peers have discussed, is the timing issue. The Oreshnik has been introduced to the world as a long range, I would say, is an intermediate range, but it's the top of intermediate range missiles.
Right.
The 5,000 kilometers is the top, and that's where it stands. It has been introduced 2 years ahead of the American Tomahawks that were promised to, or were threatened to Mr. Schultz as being based in Germany in readiness for what could be a preemptive attack on Russia. 2 years ahead. So this is an amazing feat that this weapon has been brought out.
Was Western intel, particularly CIA and MI6, caught off guard by this? Or stated differently, did the Pentagon, Whitehall, 10 Downing Street, the White House even have a hint that this was coming?
Oh, they had more than a hint. As I said, the basic technology was already shown to have been developed and to be introduced into serial production in 2018. So there's no excuse for this. But I think that they, like the general public, and even, or particularly like Russians who left the Soviet Union and who thought they know Russia, were saying about Mr. Putin's announcement in 2018 that it was an absolute bluff. And there's no way the Russians could achieve a technological advantage with a budget for military purposes 10 times smaller than the United States. And there are reasons. I don't want to be too unkind to those who would have discounted Russia's technical abilities to achieve what they have achieved. I was reminded of this when I was in my last visit to Petersburg just 2 weeks ago, and I got into a taxi. It was most of the taxis I got into were crossovers from China, which were wonderful to ride in. But this happened to be a Lada, a new Lada, and the taxi driver.
What is a Lada? A Russian?
It was a Russian car. It's a car that was built in the Togliatti in the original Fiat joint venture with Russian automobile industry. It is a modern looking car, modest but modern looking. This is not an ancient looking car. It's modern looking, but the technical achievements of the automobile engineers are not much to persuade us that Russians are capable of engineering. The driver was complaining, and not just complaining, he demonstrated when he tried to start the car. It would not start because the Russians had just gone over from the key ignition to the push button ignition.
Right.
And they never quite made it. So the only good thing about the car is it didn't have an American or Western feature of the engine cutting out when you were to light. Otherwise, this poor fellow in his taxi wouldn't just have been stuck at the curb as he was with me, but he would have been stuck in the middle of traffic. Well, my point is that in many consumer goods, Russians never were in the forefront. Their capable engineers in consumer goods went to California and they started Google and things like that. That does not mean the Russians don't have capable engineers. They have loads of them, but they tend to be patriotic and they're working for the government to make missiles to shoot at us.
Okay, how do you think the Kremlin in general, President Putin in particular, regards the continued US, UK, and Ukraine attacks on Russian land using ATACMS, American, and Storm Shadow, British?
That's very important.
He reacted with this Oreshnik after the first attack. And then there was another one, as if the West is taunting him.
It's a very pertinent question, and I'll bring you up to date with the latest news on Russian state television, which I take as significant for understanding President Putin's state of mind. The people whom I listen to, well, they reason like you and me and others on your show. They are sentient beings. They understand reality, and they're not caught in ideologies. And when I listened to Vyacheslav Nikonov last night, the presenter of the Great Game, it was the first time that I've seen him ashen-faced. He has in recent weeks been confident, not smug, but confident that the Russians were well on their way to achieving the goals that Putin set out in February 2022. Last night he was ashen-faced. And why? He said, I have to tell you that the Ministry of Defense has just announced that there were, in the past several days, 2 strikes of ATACMS within Kursk region. And in both cases, there were multiple missiles fired at the Russian targets, of which most were shot down. I think 5 out of 6, something like this. But in each case, at least one, either wholly or in part after being intercepted, did reach target and caused some damage, unquantified, to the equipment, which was radar installation, I believe. In any case, it was technical equipment that was manned and caused injuries to several Russian soldiers who were manning this equipment. And that our ministry is preparing a formidable retaliation. I put that together with a remark by one of the panelists, expert panelists on the show, who said that when we were in training, in his military training, and we were using, I don't know whether it was automatic weapons or some kind of weapon we were told this is what you do. You prepare yourself to fire, and then you do this and that. And then if there is no response from those whom you are threatening, you fire over their heads. And if there's no response to that, you fire at their heads. And that's where we are today. Our firing of the Oreshnik into Dnipropetrovsk and destroying that military complex was shooting over your heads. Our next firing will not be over your heads. So this is why he was ashen-faced.
Will that firing be at the suppliers of these weapons? Stated differently, will they attack the brand new American air base in Poland? Will they attack British troops or British technicians amassing in Poland in preparation for their execution of the Storm Shadow? Or are they going to continue to attack Ukraine military targets?
This anyone's guess. That it will be a severe attack is perfectly clear. That it'll be much more damaging and costly in lives, most likely, than what happened a week ago is almost certain. But I would say that if you want to look at a hierarchy of targets from in terms of desirability, if the Russians had a wish list, I think the first point in a wish list would be to strike the United Kingdom. The Brits have battened down various airfields they have in anticipation that there could be a strike within Britain. However, Britain falls from the top place because Brits have nuclear armed missiles on their submarines, and Mr. Starmer is sufficiently irrational to possibly use them against Russia at this early stage. So the Russians are unlikely to do that. The second, as you say, is Poland, precisely because of the recently opened base for this dual purpose, supposedly dual purpose, but actually single purpose attack on Russia for a decapitating strike. Bases, these are two bases that took about 7 years to install, and this is the Aegis onshore in Poland, another one in Romania. So that is a second choice. Poland cannot respond, but of course it would invoke Article 5. And so it's a bit risky, unpredictable how rational the Americans will be. I'd say the third down the list is to strike Moldova, which is not a NATO, which is a major point of marshaling and onward delivery as a logistics center for American military deliveries to Ukraine. It's not a NATO, and so it's fair game. And the fourth would be another strike in Ukraine, and I would name Kiev itself with something like Oreshnik, because Kiev is a holy city to Russians. It's the mother of all cities. They have been reluctant to strike Kiev for that reason, but with the Oreshnik, there is almost no damage, no collateral damage to a specific bunker or hardened site that protects American generals who are running the war in Ukraine, or protects Mr. Zelensky.
Our friend and colleague Larry Johnson reports this morning that the Russians have showered portions of Kyiv with warnings in writing for the civilians to depart. Subterfuge or a legitimate warning of an area to be attacked?
I think he's right. I think it is not a subterfuge. The Russians at this point are not playing games, and that's, I think, the major message they want to get through to Washington, London, and Berlin. That game playing is ended. They're playing for keeps, and Kiev would be a very good target. But as I said, if they use the Oreshnik, there will be very little damage to the city at large.
What do you think, with your finger on the pulse of Kremlin thinking, President Putin thinks President Biden is up to? his administration was just roundly, overwhelmingly repudiated by the electorate. His successor is very much the opposite from him in many respects, though we're seeing neocon people appointed by, or indicated he will appoint by Donald Trump. He has 2 months left in office, and he's accelerating a war that his proxy is losing. So, scratching my head, how does Putin analyze that?
They're watching the same things that you and I are watching. They were watching Admiral Bauer, and they were shocked over what he said. They're also watching what Donald Trump does not say, and they're in shock over his silence. So their emotions, I'd say, are not far removed from those of rational people in the United States. And you draw the conclusions from that. If you are alarmed, then, and you have reason to be, I think Putin is alarmed.
There are rumors that Joe Biden is going to supply nuclear warheads for use on American missiles in Ukraine. Is this taken seriously by Russia?
No, because they understand that they would then be obliged to destroy the United States. That is beyond the pale of discussion.
One of President-elect Donald Trump's senior foreign policy advisors, actually designated right now, I don't know if this is going to change. Nobody's actually been nominated, and as you know, can be nominated until Trump is sworn in, to be number 2 on the National Security Council is Sebastian Gorka. You may be familiar with Dr. Gorka. I want to show you a particularly antagonistic and bellicose comment he made just the other day, and I'm going to ask you what your reaction is and what you think President Putin's reaction would be if he saw this and gave any credibility to it. Chris, cut number 10.
I'll give one tip away that the president has mentioned. He will say to that murderous former KGB colonel, that thug who runs the Russian Federation, you will negotiate now, or the aid that we have given to Ukraine thus far will look like peanuts. That's how he will force those gentlemen to come to an arrangement that stops the bloodshed.
Who in their right mind would think that that's a way to negotiate with Vladimir Putin?
Well, this comes back to the fundamental question: will Mr. Putin show forbearance, as he did in 2016, after Trump won then, and the administration outgoing did what it could to spoil relations with Russia. And Russia showed forbearance, which I think it later regretted. They will not do that now. Their operating assumption is that whoever is in charge in the United States is actually a front man for the deep state and is not in control of foreign policy or military policy.
Even if that human being is someone as self-confident and headstrong as Donald Trump.
Well, they have seen him for 4 years, and they were not pleased with what they saw, because relations between the two countries tumbled steadily downward during that whole period. Therefore, they do not give this new Trump the benefit of doubt, and his absolute silence today to present on this whole question of the ATACMS use, or as you said, the handover of nuclear weapons to Ukraine. His silence on these issues does not give them confidence that he is worth waiting for.
Does the Kremlin think that Joe Biden and his friends who are elites in Western Europe either want to start World War III or want to extend substantially the Ukrainian conflict so that a catastrophe is dropped into the lap of Donald Trump? Does the Kremlin believe that?
I think they do. and they have good reason to believe it. Just even yesterday's reporting by the Brussels bureau chief of Russian state television news, Anastasia Popova. She was outside the European institutions where there was the discussion, or rather outside of NATO buildings, where there is discussion of what comes next. The meeting of the senior diplomats from the NATO countries on what to do next over Ukraine, and all of there were no direct briefings to the press, but there were whispers coming out, and none of it was encouraging to the Russians. So the Europeans, with the exception of Slovakia and Hungary, are remaining steadfast with the absurd policies that they held to before Trump's victory.
Do the Russians, does the Kremlin analyze the thinking of Donald Trump's likely national security team? And if they do they see them as just a Republican version of neocons?
They don't speak of it in those terms. What they speak about it is a question of realism versus ideology driven. Of course, the ideology in question is neocon, but what bothers them most is the absence of realism, or an ability to absorb what the real world is doing around them. That is what alarms the Russian elites who are part of the entourage of Putin.
Here's President Putin himself shortly before the after the Oreshnik was fired, arguing that we are entitled to strike back anybody that strikes at us or finances it. Cut number 2.
We consider ourselves entitled to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our facilities. I recommend that the ruling elites of those countries that are hatching plans to use their military contingents against Russia seriously think about this.
Does the West take him seriously? I mean, surely they should, Professor.
I don't think they do. There's still this underappreciation of Russian might. There is still this residual thinking about Russia as it was on its knees or on its back during the 1990s. They cannot fathom that the country could have reconstituted itself. They cannot begin to imagine that this thug could have saved his country and is really a national hero. It's beyond their comprehension, which is terribly sad. But the Russians take that all in.
Does the Russia, forgive me if this is naive, does the Russian government have a deep state? Does it have a part of the government that has unseen powers, is not accountable, doesn't change, gets its way? Or does Vladimir Putin control everything?
Well, he doesn't control everything. And there was a misunderstanding. He's spoken of as a dictator, which is utter nonsense, not because they have elections. Yes, they have elections, but because there are other forces in as there should be and would be in a country of 145 million with many competing, conflicting economic and political interests. Of course, he is a politician. He has to juggle competing claims on resources and on direction of the country. So this man is a remarkable juggler of competing interests. He never wiped out the liberals from the people whom he inherited when he took over from Boris Yeltsin. They are finally establishing a new vision of what the state's purpose is. That is a kind of a market economy that is driven by certain social requirements. It is a dirigism in a directed economy in the French style. This creation of the national sense, the national purpose, has taken 30 years to achieve. The war has hastened it.
Professor Dr. O, thank you very much, my dear friend. I know you're in Europe, but happy Thanksgiving from one American to
Revolutionary salute. Hold on. Let me get this up. Revolutionary salute to our Queen Shannon G for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. You know, I absolutely appreciate the little Queen. Salute to you.
Today, I know that there is a lot going on. It is November 26, 2024. And as we get into the holidays here in the US, tensions are higher than ever on the international stage as you see the Biden administration marching the US right towards World War III against Russia. And that's despite the fact that the winner of the 2024 election was the candidate who promised to end the war in Ukraine. Now you have Donald Trump building his incoming cabinet, which is set to take shape with his administration come January, and a lot of concerns about what that looks like, given some of the neocons that he has thrown in there and what that will mean for his decision making once he returns to the White House. Now, all of this is also happening as the mainstream media seems to be trying just to figure it out right now, right? They're clearly not happy with the influence of independent voices and alternative media on social media. They're not happy with the fact that Russiagate and social media censorship have not worked to completely root out all alternative media and independent journalists all around. So where does that leave our country? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Jimmy Dore, a comedian, political analyst, author, and host of the Jimmy Dore Show. Jimmy, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad I get to talk to you today. I know that there is a lot going on in the world, even as we get into the holidays here in the US. But I want to get your take on kind of where the current climate here in the US stands right now, because we have the Biden administration. They confirmed this week that they have lifted restrictions on Kiev's use of long range missiles on Russian territory, despite repeated warnings from Russia that they see this as a direct attack from the US. Now, when it comes to the American people, we did not vote for direct war against Russia, but a lot of Americans did vote for a candidate, that being Donald Trump, who said that he wanted to end the war in Ukraine. So, how do you view where we currently stand, as it seems like the Biden administration is using what should be a lame duck season to get us awfully close to World War III?
You know, it's kind of mind blowing that there isn't more outrage about what's happening. Exactly. We've been told that Donald Trump is a madman who can't be allowed to have his finger on the nuclear button, and that Joe Biden and his administration were the adults in the room. And of course, the exact opposite is true. Joe Biden, of course, is too demented to be making any decision. So, he's not. He can't even read a teleprompter anymore. So who is pulling the strings? Well, it's the handful of billionaires who are psychopaths and want want complete control of the world, and they're willing to risk a nuclear war to do so. And that's exactly what's happening. Again, I think the reason why there isn't more outrage over this is because we only have 6 media companies in the United States. They're all owned by the same people who want this war to happen, the military-industrial complex. And so they don't report it in a way that makes people excited. People got more excited about a COVID virus that had a 99.5% survivability rate than they are about a potential nuclear war that's for real. The nuclear, they have the clock, the Armageddon clock, and it's closer to midnight doomsday than ever before. I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, where people were constantly afraid of nuclear war. They were Sting was they had hit songs about it. Please make sure they had TV shows and specials and movies, and everybody was always afraid of nuclear war. And so then we finally had nuclear peace treaties, which George Bush and everybody else started getting us out of them. And now here we are hearing that Joe Biden is allowing. First of all, Ukraine can't send those long-range missiles into Russia without U.S. soldiers actually doing it. So we're actually sending the soldiers, we're sending the missiles. This is beyond psychopathic, is what's happening right now. And the only people I see in the media really screaming about it is Joe Rogan. Well, he has a huge platform, but nobody else. So the tip of the hat to Joe Rogan for doing that, and shame on everybody else for pretending like this is somehow normal, and that what's going on with this neocon administration of Joe Biden's isn't completely antithetical to what the United States citizens just voted for. They want to end these wars. They don't want this war. They've been lied to about the Ukraine war. And that's what I think is the biggest thing, is that the news media will never tell you how it started. They always start the story about the Ukraine war in the third act, which was when Putin invaded Ukraine, the Donbass. That's not when this started. This started probably in the 90s when we told the Russians that we wouldn't expand NATO. And then, of course, we put 16 new countries in. And now we're right up to the border putting nuclear missiles and to putting Ukraine into NATO, threatening to do so. And so we overthrew their democratically elected government in 2014 in the Maidan coup. We got in bed with right-wing Nazis to do it. It was a CIA-sponsored coup. This is the part of the story that the American people are never told. This is the part of the story Jon Stewart will never tell his viewers, that no one will ever tell the truth about what actually, that Rachel Maddow won't tell you, Anderson Cooper, Sean Hannity, they won't, the New York Times, they won't tell you this part of the story. And the part of the story is that we've provoked this. And the point is, we thought Russia would be weaker. By the way, we also did the Nord Stream pipeline, which Europe, and we destroyed their economy, right? So that was a pipeline that brought cheap energy to Germany, and the United States blew it up. We now know it's confirmed. And it skyrocketed energy prices for Germany. It's wrecked their economy, and Germany is the economy of Europe. Everybody's hurting through this war, except ironically, Russia. Russia now is closer with China. Their economy and their currency is stronger than ever. And who's experiencing inflation? Who's experiencing bad economy? It's the United States and Europe. And again, the people, you're told by the media that's bought by the military industrial complex that somehow Joe Biden and his administration are the sensible grown-up adults in the room. They are not. They are psychopathic neocons who want nothing more than more war and more war. Right now, they're funding a genocide in Israel, and everybody seems to give them a pass for that. So anyway, I know that's a long answer to your question of where we're at, but that's where we're at, and we're actually closer to nuclear war than ever.
Yeah, and I think that you make really great points. And it's interesting to me how you were pointing out the fact that just a few decades ago, this was something that we were legitimately concerned about. And it's like now in 2024, we're watching these escalations and just kind of going, oh, it's no big deal, right? Russia just test fired a nuclear capable medium range missile and made it clear that, hey, there's no way for any of you to intercept this. And the US is just sitting here going, oh, we're just going to keep ramping up tensions more and more. Now, when it comes to the role that the mainstream media play in this, I feel like every year we get a new Gallup poll talking about how Americans just don't trust the media. And I think that that's true. Most Americans don't. But as you were pointing out there, they still do have a hand in, I would say, impacting the way that the public thinks with what they cover, right? If they're coming out going, we need to be concerned about World War III and we need to be talking about the doomsday clock, then a lot more people would be more concerned about it. But because they're not, because they're so focused on, Orange Man bad returning to the White House and everything else that they say comes with that, it doesn't seem like there is as much panic. How do you see the role that the media is playing and the fact that Americans we can say that we don't trust the mainstream media, but yet we're still listening, we're still tuning in, and it's still having an effect?
Well, it certainly has an effect. It's again, most people. I like to say the U.S. citizens are the most propagandized people in the world, and they don't know it. Other countries are aware. Like in North Korea, their people are aware that they're getting propagandized. In the old Soviet Union, they were aware that it was propaganda. China also. In the United States, they think they're really getting the truth when they read the New York Times, when they tell them that Tulsi Gabbard, who's an officer in the armed forces right now in the military, is somehow a Russian traitor to. I mean, they believe that seed oils are good for them. They believe that the boosters are necessary. They believe anything that is put in the New York Times, the Washington Post, because again, there's no. But the one good bright spot is that Twitter, which is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and it's owned by a tech billionaire who's also a defense contractor. But uh, but he has allowed more truth to come out on that social media app than has ever been allowed to come out in any corporate media or any other social media app. And so it's now turned into the number one place where people go to get their news. And so people can actually get a counter narrative to the establishment at Twitter. And I think that's fantastic. And right now they're screaming about it. Morning Joe and the head of Axios just got an award from the National Press Club, and he was screaming, almost foaming at the mouth, about how we're the real news and Twitter isn't.
Elon Musk sits on Twitter every day, or X today, saying like, we are the media, you are the media. My message to Elon Musk is bullshit.
Well, I think you protest too much. And there's a reason why people don't turn to the establishment news anymore, and they're turning away from it. It's because we're tired of being lied to, and we know that you're bought and paid for by corporations, big pharma, Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, which is why you told us up until 5 seconds ago that Joe Biden was sharp and focused. They were telling us that I knew Joe Biden was demented in 2020 when he got elected, and then it just got accelerated. And they were telling us he was sharp. So people, they're constantly lying to the American people, and they're upset now that people are turning to alternatives for their media. Places like this, places like Twitter, places like YouTube, Rumble, to get their news. And so I say that right now they're talking about selling off MSNBC. They're talking about because nobody wants to watch it anymore. CNN is shuttering their biggest hosts because they can't afford them, and so these are all good signs. I think the establishment media needs to go away. It's all bought by corporate media. There is no firewall between the advertising department and the news reporting department. It's exactly the same. They all know where their bread is buttered. Don Lemon admitted it, that of course our advertisers influence. Well, I know what I can say and how much I cannot say. He's said that. There's video of him saying that. And so now he's doing a YouTube show nobody watches because nobody needs to go to YouTube to get that same garbage they can get at CNN right now. So unfortunately, there was a thing called when I grew up, again, there used to be 50 giant media companies. They were still giant and power was consolidated, but there was 50 of them, right? So you could get more news and there was more diversity of opinion. In 1996, Bill Clinton passed the Telecommunications Act, which took us from 50 giant media companies down to 6. And reporters used to come from blue collar backgrounds, and they weren't looking to make friends with the elite and the establishment. They were looking to expose them and stick their thumb in their eye. Well, now because there's only 6 companies, all the reporters know they're going to work for one of these billionaire owned companies. So, and they don't come from blue collar backgrounds anymore. They get hand chosen by the billionaires who run those media companies from Ivy League institutions. And why do they do that? Because they know they're going to be class loyal. And that's exactly what's happened. The guy who's Jeff Bezos handpicked Dave Weigel to cover progressive news in the Washington Post. Dave Weigel comes from Northwestern University, who did pro-Iraq war rallies when he was the editor of the Northwestern newspaper. Of course, that's the guy billionaire Jeff Bezos handpicks to cover progressive. He picks a right-wing warmongering maniac. So those are the kind of people who are covering the news right now, handpicked from Ivy League schools, and they know they're going to be class loyal, which is why you can't get the real news about anything, which is why they tell you Bernie Sanders' plans can't work. And then they call him a sexist and a misogynist, and his followers are violent. And he's also got Russiagated. But Bernie's such a weakling, he went along with it, right? They did Russiagate. They're still doing it, right? They're doing it to Tulsi right now. So anyway, it's again, that's another long answer to your question. But yes, unfortunately, the establishment media still has a lot of influence, especially with the shit lib friends that I have in Hollywood, or ex-friends, because they can't. I've had people brag to me. I go, where do you get your information? With people who are talking about the Ukraine war, and and he said, oh, I'm enjoying watching Putin get his ass kicked across Ukraine. I'm like, where do you get your news from? And they said, oh, we get he goes, I read 3 newspapers a day. Yeah, do you know they're all owned by the same people? They have no idea that they're getting propaganda. So that's the big tragedy of America, is that the people are the most propagandized in the world, and they have no idea.
Oh, absolutely. And it's always interesting for me, those people who only pay attention to the mainstream media coverage on Ukraine, because then when you have the Washington Post and the New York Times start to admit that Ukraine isn't doing as well as they initially claimed that it was, I'm going, are those people just the most confused, right? Are they reading the new article and going, what in the world happened? This is not what I expected. I guess they may be. But I do want to ask you about the incoming Trump administration. You know, Trump has lined up his cabinet, and I will be the first to say here, right? I'm a bit concerned about some of the neocons he has thrown into his cabinet, as we saw it with the first term. The people he surrounds himself with, they are very much in his ear. He has said that he wants to end the war in Ukraine. He is still very, very pro-Israel, as you know, they are carrying out an all-out genocide of the Palestinians that the U.S. is completely enabling. So how do you see how the Trump administration is taking shape when it comes to his cabinet, and kind of what we could be in for come January?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of concerning picks, to say the least. I was sad to see Matt Gaetz drop out. He seemed to be the target of a honeypot operation, which I just covered on my show, which no one else seems to be covering, even though the Twitter thread about it's got over millions of views, 46,000 likes. The establishment media will not report this story. But so that was a big, because Matt Gaetz has been great. He doesn't, take the donor money. He's exposing the corruption, the financial corruption inside Congress. He's exposed.
The very what the United States and Israel are doing in Gaza is threatening the very existence of international law. After World War II, a series of international legal institutions were created to try to prevent the horrors of the war from being repeated again. And yet here we are 80 years later, and these institutions have utterly failed to stop the worst possible crimes from being committed in broad daylight by the world's most powerful country, the United States, and one of its closest allies, Israel. We can see this very clearly in the United Nations, where in the past year, the United States has vetoed 4 different resolutions calling for a ceasefire and peace in Gaza. The US is the only member of the UN Security Council that has opposed these 4 resolutions. Even major US allies like Britain and France have voted in support of these resolutions. Quite literally, the US is the only thing standing in the way of peace and preventing the only institution at the UN that actually has the teeth and the power to implement international law, which is the Security Council. Now, this latest resolution that Washington vetoed on the 20th of November was not in any way controversial. It was completely boilerplate. The official UN news agency noted that the text demanded an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. It demanded the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. It demanded immediate access for civilians in the Gaza Strip to basic services and humanitarian aid. And it rejected any effort to starve Palestinians as the threat of famine grows under a brutal Israeli siege. So by vetoing this, what the United States is communicating is that it does not support giving humanitarian aid to Palestinians. It does not support ending the killing of Palestinian civilians en masse, and it does not support the end to the brutal Israeli siege that is starving Palestinians to death. The top United Nations expert on the right to food has been repeating this for 8 months. He has said very clearly that there's a lot of evidence showing that Israel is using food as a weapon. It is trying to starve as many Palestinians to death as possible. And this lawyer, by the way, this UN expert, Michael Fakhri, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, he's Canadian and he teaches international law in the United States. This is a very mainstream Western human rights lawyer. And yet he has been completely ignored. The UN has been completely ignored and has been attacked by the United States and Israel. In October 2024, on the anniversary of the US-Israeli assault on Gaza, Michael Fakhri testified before the United Nations, and he said, quote, "1 year ago, I told you that food is increasingly used as a weapon against civilians and raised alarm over the risk of genocide against the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, you did not take any sufficient action," end quote. And then he said that we've seen over this year that apparently, quote, "no degree of horror, no amount of death and pain is enough to trigger a global response to starvation or genocide," end quote. Now, for people who are curious, I avoid saying that word because every time I do, my videos are suppressed on this platform and they don't get many views. So unfortunately, because of the climate of censorship on social media these days, I have to avoid certain words in order to maximize the reach and the impact of the work that I do here. But anyway, the point is that the United States and Israel are waging a full-on war, not only against the Palestinian people, but against all international legal institutions. For instance, in January 2024, the International Court of Justice at The Hague, the ICJ, ruled very clearly that Israel can be investigated on charges of genocide that were applied by South Africa, a country that was a victim of apartheid and European colonialism. And what did Israel do? It completely ignored all of the rulings done by the ICJ, which is the top UN legal authority. The International Court of Justice was set up after World War II to be the UN's legal arm to take action against countries that commit the kinds of crimes that were committed by Nazi Germany in World War II and by fascist Italy and by the Japanese Empire. And yet here we are, and Israel, with the support of the United States, is completely spitting in the face of the ICJ, ignoring all of its rulings, even after the ICJ has ordered Israel to stop killing Palestinians. And of course, it's not just the ICJ, it's also the ICC, the International Criminal Court. What's confusing is that both of the courts are located at The Hague in the Netherlands, but the ICC was ironically set up by the Western powers as a kind of neoliberal alternative to the ICJ, because the ICJ is focused on states, whereas the ICC is focused on individual leaders. However, despite the fact that the ICC has a very long history of being biased in the interest of the West and being very biased in particular against African leaders, despite that long history of bias, the ICC this November made a historic decision to issue arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And I did a previous video, which I will link to in the description below, discussing how the United States responded to the ICC by attacking the court, threatening sanctions on the court, blackmailing and threatening personnel at the court, including the ICC prosecutor. And meanwhile, the US media is openly saying that Israel should not be held accountable for the crimes against humanity that it has committed. The Washington Post editorial board published an article saying very clearly that Israel should not be held to account at the ICC. Instead, the Washington Post editorial board insisted that Russia, Sudan, and Myanmar should be held accountable. So what they're actually saying, this is one of the top US newspapers in the capital of the United States. What they're saying is that the ICC should only be used to go after the global south and Russia, that Western countries, the United States and their allies, should not ever be held accountable for the worst possible crimes a country could commit. No, because they actually don't believe in international law. They believe that the West can do whatever it wants, it can commit whatever crimes it wants, and there should be no consequences.
Well, what y'all need to realize, and I've been teaching this, it's not just white people. See, growing up, I thought it was just white people who had this attitude. No, now we found out the Greek freaks, the shoe shining, buck dancing, congressional black coons, they are absolutely have this mind state. They don't give a damn about no African countries. We should never let them tell us anything about Africa again. We understand they are imperialists. They helped put black people in cages, overthrew Gaddafi, killed Gaddafi, helped Al Qaeda, and they ain't never apologized or said a mumbling word. Shocking. They are for segregation. We cannot. I don't want to ever hear the Congressional Black Caucus telling me another Dr. King story or talk about the civil rights when they are for segregation in Israel. Whites only water fountains. Everybody know that's true. Whites only apartment buildings. Your black ass can't be there. You're not Jewish, are you? You see, this is disgusting what's going on. And the Congressional Black Caucus done exposed their hand. They are white supremacists. Remember, that's a mind state. That's not a color. I used to teach that. That is a mind state. They want to be the imperialists so bad that they're willing to go along with genocide. I don't want to hear about Hitler. These people are Hitler. They doing Hitler-type crimes, and they're backing it. Don't tell me about
because the West is the best. It's better than everyone else. I mean, this is the colonialist view they have of the world, where the West can colonize everyone, invade everyone, wage war on everyone, impose sanctions on everyone, and there should be no consequences. There only should be consequences for U.S. adversaries, for countries that Washington doesn't like. And by the way, when we're talking about the Washington Post, we're not just talking about the media class and the political class in Washington. We're talking about the oligarchy, the capitalist billionaire oligarchs who control U.S. politics, because you know who owns the Washington Post. This powerful newspaper is the personal property of one of the richest billionaires on earth, Jeff Bezos, who has more than $200 billion of wealth. And for a long time, for years, supporters of the Washington Post claimed, oh, well, Jeff Bezos has no influence over the editorial decisions of the newspaper. We saw recently that that's a lie, because he ordered the editorial board to stop making presidential endorsements because he knew that Trump was probably going to win, and he wants to make money from the Trump administration because he's a billionaire and he has many contracts. His companies, Jeff Bezos' companies like Amazon, have received billions of dollars of contracts from the US government, including from the CIA, by the way. So when the Washington Post editorial board says that the ICC should only focus on prosecuting people in the global south and Russia, they're not only speaking on behalf of political elites in Washington, they're speaking on behalf of their centi-billionaire oligarch boss, Jeff Bezos. But honestly, I can't say that I was surprised at seeing that editorial in the Washington Post, because the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, who's a British attorney, he himself admitted back in May, when he initially applied for the arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, and there was a 6-month delay when the US and Western governments were pressuring the ICC not to actually issue the arrest warrants. Well, he admitted that Western governments were pressuring him, and Karim Khan, the ICC prosecutor, said that a senior Western official in a Western government told him that the ICC was built for Africa and thugs like Putin. This is how Western government officials speak privately to each other when they're not speaking publicly, with their propaganda and PR speak. Privately, they all say, yeah, international law doesn't apply to us. It only applies to Africa and thugs like Putin. Here's a clip of the ICC prosecutor.
And of course, I've had some elected leaders speak to me and be very blunt. This court is built for Africa and for thugs like Putin, was what one senior leader told me. We don't view it like that. This court is the legacy of Nuremberg. We're not going to be dissuaded by threats or any other activities.
So when you hear Western government officials talk about this idea of the so-called rules-based international order, this is what they actually mean. They're trying to replace the international law-based order centered in the United Nations with this very vague concept of the so-called rules-based order in which the Western colonialist countries make the rules and order everyone around. That's what they actually mean. So when U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken or U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, when they accuse China of violating the so-called rules-based order, as they constantly do, it's one of their favorite pastimes, what they actually mean is that China is threatening the global dictatorship controlled by the United States and the Western colonial powers. Because that's what it really is. It's an attempt to create an imperial dictatorship in which the US and its allies can literally do whatever they want. They can commit the worst possible crimes against humanity with zero consequences, and no legal institution can actually hold them accountable. Instead, the US and its allies use these legal institutions to wage lawfare, judicial warfare against their adversaries, against the global South, against China, against Russia, against Iran. And then if you don't support them, they say that you're authoritarian, you're against democracy, you're against human rights. Well, they are authoritarian. Well, they overthrow democratically elected governments around the world, as the CIA has done in Chile, in Guatemala, in Iran, in Ghana. The list goes on. As they wage constant wars and invade countries and bomb countries. And the irony is that the US and its allies in the West are the ones who created these institutions in the first place after World War II. It's not a coincidence that the United Nations was designed in a way that concentrated all of the power in the Security Council, where there were 5 permanent members who were the victors of World War II. The US, and at that time, its allies in World War II, which were the US, the UK, France, the Soviet Union, and China. And actually, ridiculously, Taiwan, this small island province that is part of China, but it's only a small percentage of it, held China's seat at the UN Security Council until 1971, when finally the People's Republic of China, mainland China, was given its rightful spot in the UN Security Council. And here we are today, where France and the UK have populations of fewer than 70 million, and yet they have permanent seats. They have veto power in the Security Council, and yet huge countries, literally with billions of people, like for instance, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Brazil, Nigeria, these massive countries that together have billions of people, they are not given permanent seats in the Security Council. And despite all of the biases in the United Nations, where top officials are still overwhelmingly overrepresented from the West, and there is not nearly enough representation of the global South, still the United States will not tolerate it, because the US will only accept having 100% control, not just 90% control, 100%. In fact, back in the 1990s, US officials used to be quite open about the fact that they sought global domination. It's not an exaggeration. In 1992, the US Undersecretary of Defense Wolfowitz published the infamous Wolfowitz Doctrine, in which he wrote internally in a secret memo at the Pentagon that Washington's goal is to, quote, preclude any hostile power from dominating a region critical to our interests, and also to strengthen the barriers against the emergence of a global threat to the interests of the US and our allies, end quote. So what he's saying here is that The US should not allow any strong country from emerging. The US should be the only superpower on earth and should dominate every single region. What are the regions he named? Europe, East Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. That's basically all of the world except Africa, which he didn't mention. So the stated policy of the Pentagon was we should control the entire world. And speaking of the Washington Post, which has always been a very obedient mouthpiece for the imperial ruling class of the United States, back in 1990, the Washington Post neoconservative columnist Charles Krauthammer published an infamous article titled The Unipolar Moment, which again showed what people in Washington were thinking about at the time. And they have this idea today. They said, we are in a unique historical moment, a moment of unipolarity. The multipolar world is struggling to be born, and the transition between these two worlds is now, and it won't last long. In this unipolar world, power resides in one bloc, the Western Alliance, led by the United States. And the message was that the US should take advantage of that opportunity to create a global empire that no other power could challenge. And that's why today the US and Europe are so desperate to try to destroy China and Russia and Iran and any independent government that stands up and resists the US-led Western global dictatorship. And in Gaza, they are destroying international law. They are destroying the very same legal institutions that they created. And of course, I should point out that when the United Nations was established and the International Court of Justice and international law, when all of that was established at the end of World War II in the 1940s, at that time, much of the world was still colonized by the Western powers. And throughout the second half of the 20th century, peoples in Africa and Asia fought for their freedom. They made huge sacrifices. Millions of people were killed by the Western colonial powers who committed crimes that were very similar to the crimes committed by Nazi Germany against the peoples of Algeria and Vietnam and Korea and Angola and Mozambique and South Africa and Zimbabwe. And the Western powers were forced to formally concede political independence to these newly independent countries. However, what we can see today in the 2020s is that the Western powers never truly accepted decolonization, and they have been trying to reimpose their hegemonic control over global institutions, over the United Nations. They're trying to replace international law, which they cannot completely control, with the vague idea of the rules-based international order that they control, that they make the rules in. And Gaza is the perfect symbol of this. Israel is a European-style colonial project with its roots in European colonialism. The political father of the movement that colonized historic Palestine to create the modern state of Israel, Theodor Herzl, was a European colonialist who wrote letters to the British colonizer of Africa, Cecil Rhodes, asking for help to colonize Palestine. And he openly said it was a colonial project. The British Empire itself gave the green light to the creation of the Israeli colonial outpost in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration at a time when the British Empire was still colonizing India and still colonizing many parts of Africa. And here we are today, where Israel, with the staunch support of the United States, is carrying out the same kinds of colonial practices that were carried out by the European colonialists in the 19th century and the early 20th century. And the leading Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, which, by the way, has been sanctioned by the Israeli regime, which, you know, the US claims is supposedly a democracy, which obviously it's not. Well, meanwhile, the sanctioned top Israeli newspaper, the editorial board of Haaretz, has said very clearly, quote, Netanyahu's ethnic cleansing in Gaza is on display for all to see. They quoted an Israeli brigadier general who admitted, quote, there is no intention of allowing the residents of the northern Gaza Strip to return to their homes, end quote. This is an admission by an Israeli military commander that they are ethnically cleansing Gaza in order to colonize, to steal and colonize Palestinian land. As the Haaretz editorial board put it, I'm quoting, "The Israeli military is conducting an ethnic cleansing operation in the northern Gaza Strip. The few Palestinians remaining in the area are being forcibly evacuated. Homes and infrastructure have been destroyed, and wide roads in the area are being built and completing the separation of the communities in the northern strip from the center of Gaza City," end quote. And by the way, it's not just Gaza. The plan of the far-right extremists who govern Israel is to colonize all of historic Palestine, to ethnically cleanse the indigenous Palestinians, and to steal all of their land. This was admitted in November by the far-right Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, a member of the Israeli regime cabinet. He tweeted, "In 2025, this is the year of sovereignty in what he called Judea and Samaria," which is the term that these extremists use to refer to the West Bank, which is illegally occupied Palestinian territory according to international law. It belongs to the Palestinian people, but Israel has been illegally occupying it since the 1960s. And here you have top Israeli regime officials openly admitting that we are going to annex this territory, which is something that Netanyahu, the wanted war criminal, he has said clearly that he is going to annex, to colonize all of the West Bank. And the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who again is a Western politician, despite his biases, he has publicly warned that Israel is trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza. This is the leader of the UN, the chief of the UN. But because of the structure of the UN, with all of the power being concentrated in the Security Council and the United States being given a veto, this means that the US is destroying international law and preventing any consequences as this 21st century colonial regime carries out the worst possible crimes imaginable and colonizes Palestinian land. The entire world is watching. No one can do anything because the United States is preventing international law from actually being implemented. And what's incredible is how blatant the US and Israeli attacks on international law are. I mean, they are rogue regimes by definition. If you look up what a rogue state is in the dictionary, it should say the US and Israel. Israel banned the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, from entering its territory. I mean, Israel should be expelled from the United Nations for this. Israel is a member of the UN, and yet they're banning the chief of the UN. The governments of more than 100 countries signed a joint statement supporting the UN Secretary General and demanding that action be taken against Israel. And what was the response of the US? Crickets. The United States is preventing any action from being taken, protecting Israel. And this is, of course, bipartisan. Joe Biden, the Democrat, is president right now, and he's overseeing all of this. And Donald Trump, who's the president-elect, who will come back to the White House in January, Trump appointed as his UN ambassador Elise Stefanik. She's the nominee. And she has openly attacked the United Nations. She's a far-right Israel supporter. She's an anti-Palestinian bigot. And she openly called for defunding the UN Palestine Refugees Agency, UNRWA, which was created to provide support for Palestinians after they were ethnically cleansed in the Nakba of 1948 that created Israel through the mass expulsion of hundreds of thousands of indigenous Palestinians. So when Trump comes back to the White House, he's going to be waging a scorched earth war against the UN. Let's not forget that during his first term, Donald Trump very symbolically withdrew the US from the UN Human Rights Council, which says a lot about the US government's priorities and how it's the enemy of human rights around the world. And by the way, I should point out that it was not just Donald Trump who did that. It was even now some of these Republicans who are portrayed by the US media as the good moderate Republicans, like Nikki Haley, who ran against Trump in the Republican primary for president. Nikki Haley was Donald Trump's ambassador to the UN. and she was also attacking the UN Human Rights Council and withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council. And of course, the current US president is still Joe Biden, a Democrat, and his vice president, Kamala Harris. They're the ones whose administration has vetoed 4 different ceasefire resolutions in 1 year in the UN Security Council. So this is completely bipartisan in Washington. The Republicans and Democrats not only support Israel as it carries out crimes against humanity against the Palestinian people, not only do they support colonialism, they are also carrying out a war against the United Nations and a war against international law itself. To conclude here, I want to look at a very important statement that was published by top UN experts in October. It's titled, "The International Order is Breaking Down in Gaza." This was published on the official website of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. These international legal experts wrote, quote, "The world faces the most profound crisis since the end of World War II. Israel has been carrying out genocide attacks, ethnic cleansing, and collective punishment of Palestinians, which risk breaking down the international multilateral system." The Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, who's now wanted by the ICC for war crimes, ordered a complete siege, no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel of Gaza, which these UN experts described as, quote, "the biggest open-air prison of our time," end quote. They emphasized that, quote, "the international legal order is breaking down in the face of these atrocities," end quote. It notes that Israel has completely ignored the provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice. And again, it is the United States that is making this possible. It is the United States that is destroying international law in an attempt to try to save its hegemony, to try to save its empire, with Israel being a crucial extension of the US empire in one of the most geostrategic regions on Earth. So I'll conclude today with the message with which I began this analysis. What's going on in Gaza is not only a horrific example of crimes against humanity being committed against the Palestinian people. It's not only an example of colonialism being supported by the United States. This is a full frontal assault on international law, period. If the US and Israel can continue carrying out these kinds of crimes with zero consequences, then international law simply doesn't exist. They have destroyed it. On that note, I'm going to conclude.
What in the world does this mean? What is your take on this ceasefire deal? Anyway, I'm surprised that this even went through when the entire reasoning for Hezbollah targeting Israel was to get them to stop the war, the onslaught, the genocide in Gaza. That is not ending. So what do you make of this whole thing?
Well, we'll have to see the details of the ceasefire and what the decision is made ultimately, because we have to see if what the Lebanese government and Hezbollah has agreed upon is the same text that the Israeli regime has agreed upon. But Hezbollah has, as you know, made huge sacrifices for the people of Gaza. And immediately after the onslaught against Gaza began, Hezbollah began to strike targets on the border with Lebanon in order to draw away half of the Israeli army or large segments of the Israeli military from Gaza, so as to ease pressure and to spare lives, save children. And that was going on for over 11 months until the fighting between the Israeli regime and the resistance in Lebanon became very severe and very heavy, and the Israeli regime pushed into Lebanon as well. And of course, Sayed Hassan Nasrallah was martyred, and so were many ordinary citizens across Lebanon. I think the sacrifices that Hezbollah made, especially over the last couple of months, are extraordinary, and all voluntarily carried out for the sake of Gaza. This is not over, obviously. This is if there is a ceasefire, the Israelis will have to continue to keep their military presence in the north, because the ceasefire could break down any day. It's supposed to be a 60-day ceasefire. So I doubt the Israelis will be able to do much or move many of its forces to the south, because if there is a break in the ceasefire, then there will be heavy fighting again.
So why do you think, was this just one of those cases where Lebanon gets pummeled and then they decide, all right, fine, we have to care more about our people than the Palestinians? That's what it's kind of looking like to me from the agreement?
Well, it is military defeat for the Israelis, because they failed to make any inroads inside Lebanon. They failed to take territory. But you have to keep in mind that Hezbollah's situation is very complicated, because unlike in Gaza, where the resistance controls that area, in Lebanon, Hezbollah has enemies, and those enemies are Western embassies, Western NGOs, and their allies. You have the Lebanese forces and other such groups which were involved, which were allies of the Israeli regime when they invaded Lebanon in 1982, or the Kataib. They were also involved in the Sabra Shatila massacre in Beirut in 1982, where 3,500 Palestinians and Shias were slaughtered together in 36 hours. With the Israelis, they surrounded the refugee camp, and they carried out that mass slaughter. So Hezbollah has to keep an eye on its back, because Western embassies are trying to undermine the resistance, and it also has to be fighting the enemy in front of it. So it's not that it cares more about its own people. It's the fact that the Americans, the Europeans, they are working with Netanyahu. They're allies of Netanyahu, and they are trying to bring down the resistance in Lebanon. The resistance is very popular as we speak, because overwhelmingly the people of Lebanon support it. The Palestinian refugees in Lebanon support it. Muslims of all persuasions, many Christians and Druze, but it does have dangerous enemies, the resistance, and at the forefront is the United States. So they have to be careful. But remember, this isn't a permanent ceasefire. This is a 60-day ceasefire, and so both sides will be very careful about the other side, obviously.
Yeah. Well, Trump takes office in 55 days, and this ceasefire is supposed to go for 60. So a lot of people believe that, I mean, Trump's rhetoric, I mean, just watching the stuff that he says, he's extremely pro-Israel, has been bought off by the Adelson Fund, $100 million, seems to be doing whatever Israel wants, will allow them to do whatever they want. And, he does say things like, end the war, end it now. I don't want this war. But at the same time, the far right in Israel seems to be pretty energized by the fact that Trump is going to be taking office. They view it as a green light to annex land and to do whatever it is that they want, and perhaps even to go after Iran in an actual war, although Trump seems to be pretty war adverse. So it's, he's a mercurial president. We don't know which way he's going to go. But what do you think is going to happen in 60 days? I mean, Trump is going to take office at 55. Do you think that this is going to continue once Trump is in? I mean, what do you make of Trump winning and how Israel perceives that?
Doesn't make a difference really for the Iranians. What Biden and Harris did in Gaza and Lebanon is unforgivable.
Right.
And it's Trump has carried out atrocities in our part of the world, including the murder of General Soleimani. But what Biden and his team have done is really unprecedented. We've had a online genocide, a genocide that's been taking place in front of our eyes for well over a year now. We wake up in the morning, see horrible scenes. We go to bed at night after seeing horrible scenes on our on the internet, and it's been a very painful year for everyone. And it just goes on, and the United States and the Europeans have been supporting it. And what is extraordinary is that, unlike in Gaza, where Western media and Western governments, they give the excuse that we're not present, we can't confirm things. They have a very strong presence in Beirut, both mainstream Western media and Western embassies and Western NGOs, and they know exactly what the Israeli regime is doing. Today, the regime has been carrying out heavy airstrikes across Lebanon against civilian targets to get concessions. In other words, they slaughter women and children so that they can get concessions at the last minute from Hezbollah, from the Lebanese government. And that, is extraordinary that the West allows this to happen. The West facilitates it. They give the weapons, the ammunition, the political cover, the financial assistance, and the media support needed so that they can continue doing this. I think that the biggest loser in all this, of course, is Israel, because it has delegitimized itself in the eyes of those people across the world who once thought it was legitimate. For those of us who never thought it to be legitimate, that's another issue altogether. But the mood has changed towards the Israeli regime dramatically. Even in the West, things have changed significantly, as you would know much better than I. But just as important and as significant is that the whole West has been, their image, their credibility has been demolished because they are partners in this genocide. So I think the Israeli regime is the big loser. And just today, the way in which they've been slaughtering people across Lebanon is only going to make it worse for the regime. They failed on the battlefield. They haven't gained anything. They haven't been able to gain any new concessions against Hezbollah. They've caused damage. They've caused murder. They've hurt ordinary people. They've hurt the resistance, but they failed to get what they said they will do on the battlefield. So I think that's a major failure. But more importantly, Kim, is that Iran is going to strike Israel. Have no doubt about that. There is zero doubt that the Iranians are going to carry out a very, very, very heavy strike on Israel, far more painful than what we saw last time around. And the regime is going to have to face punishment. And I think when Iran strikes Israel, it will be a message really to the United States as well. Of course, right now these are just words, but I'm confident that this will happen. And
why would Iran?
After this,
what would be the reasoning for Iran to strike Israel right now? Why would Iran want to do that and provoke what would surely be a war at that point?
Well, it's retaliation. The Israeli regime carried out an airstrike against Iran, and the Iranians said that they will retaliate. So Iran has not only the right to do so, but really an obligation to do so. Remember, this began years ago. The Israelis have assassinated Iranians. They've carried out, with the help of the Americans and Europeans, they carried out sabotage in Iran. They murdered a number of Iranian officers over the years in Syria who were fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda because they were supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda alongside the Americans and Erdogan and others in the region during the Syrian dirty war. But more recently, when they bombed the Iranian embassy, the Iranians, as you recall, retaliated. Then they murdered Ismail Haniyeh when he was martyred in Tehran on the day of President Pezeshkian's inauguration. The Iranians retaliated again. So these were all retaliations. Then the Israelis carried out an airstrike on Iran, which wasn't successful, but still it was an act of aggression. So the Iranians are going to carry out a heavy strike to create deterrence. But it's also going to be a message to the United States, to Trump and to Biden, of course, who's may not even know what's going on. But the Iranians will strike hard to tell Trump and the Israeli regime that we are prepared to go all the way. We don't want a regional war, but we will establish deterrence. The Iranian leader said that we have to hit them so hard that they recalculate. In other words, that they recognize that they cannot strike Iran and get away with it. And I think that punishment that Iran deals to the Israeli regime will have a major impact on the equation with regards to Gaza and Lebanon too.
Well, Israel is threatening Iran essentially right now with the ceasefire deal, saying now we're just going to shift our focus. We want to focus on Iran. What do you think that means? I mean, do you think that the Israelis have every intention? It just seems so strange to me that Israel would have every intention to go to war with Iran, considering just the size of the nations. There's no comparison there. I mean, the only reason why Israel would want to pick a fight with Iran is if Israel was absolutely sure the United States would be there to fight that war for them. There's no way that Israel can go up against, I mean, just the population size, the geography. I mean, none of it makes any actual sense. Even if, Israel, I mean, there's been claims for years that Israel has nuclear weapons. I kind of doubt, I mean, honestly, and I've always just assumed that must be true. They have nuclear weapons. It's been admitted, supposedly a number of times, but I kind of doubt they actually do have them. I feel like they've shown that they're insane enough that if they had nukes, they would have used them by now somewhere on somebody, but we haven't seen anything like that. Maybe it's just a bunch of Hasbara, right? To just say, oh, we have nukes, better watch out. We got nukes. You got, and it's like it's better to scare people into believing you have them. I mean, I'm not sure. What do you think of that? Do you think they have nukes? Do you think that Iran would be a target?
Well, there are a number of things here. One is that the very fact that people do think about the Israeli regime using nuclear weapons show how insane the regime is in the eyes of people across the world, regardless of the fact that it is an ethno-supremacist regime that carries out genocide. But the very fact that people even think about the unthinkable shows what sort of regime we're dealing with here. But obviously, the Iranians in any exchange with the Israeli regime will have the upper hand. We already saw the previous Iranian strike on Israel and how people across the world saw all of Iran's missiles, almost all of them, get through, almost all of them, over 90%. Whereas when the Israelis said they're going to carry out a heavy airstrike against Iran and the Iranians won't know what hit them, nothing happened. I was asleep when the strikes came, when they attacked. And what woke me up was RT and Al Jazeera contacting me and asking me what's going on. And the place where they struck is right beside Tehran. It's actually not, it's to the south east of where I am right now. And you can see it from many parts of Tehran. And it's called Parchin. And if they were secondary explosions, we would have heard them. If the outlandish claim that they struck a military nuclear site or a site that's developed for developing nuclear weapons, then we would have radioactive material.
Right.
And there would be, we would have radioactivity. It's all nonsense. They failed. But so the Israelis are not, and the Americans were helping them, by the way. They facilitated the attack against Iran. So the regime is not very strong. And one thing that the American government and the Israelis have to take into account is that Iran has many underground missile bases across the country. And Iran has many tens of thousands of missiles that can strike Israel and hundreds of thousands of missiles that can strike anywhere in the Persian Gulf region, as well as hundreds of thousands of drones. And why is that important? The tens of thousands of missiles, as you were mentioning earlier, Israel is a small regime. Palestine is very small. Iran can devastate all of its infrastructure in just a couple of rounds of missile strikes. But if the Americans were to enter the battle, the Iranians would destroy all their bases, but more importantly, with their drones and missiles, they would destroy all the oil and gas facilities in the Persian Gulf, because those countries that host U.S. bases, if the United States attacks Iran, then they are complicit. And that would drive oil and energy prices through the roof. And I think it would create a global economic collapse worse than 1929, especially under the current circumstances where, again, you know better than I, how fragile the global economy is and how fragile the U.S. economy is.
So a few days after you were on the show last time, there was a 4.4 magnitude earthquake in Iran that seemed to happen deep underground. And a lot of people, this was on, I believe, October 9th, 8th or 9th. And there was a lot of speculation that perhaps this was an underground nuclear test. So I'm curious your thoughts on that. Does Iran have nukes? I mean, one of the other aspects of Hasbara, I would say, is to claim, if I wanted to kind of create this tension and to kind of create a Cold War, which has kind of been going on between Israel and Iran and the United States for this period of time, I would want to claim that Israel has nukes. So I'd want to put the messaging out there that Israel has nukes and better watch it. This little country has nukes. And I'd also actually want to spread the idea that Iran doesn't. And the reason I would want to do that is because once Iran is a nuclear power, you stop messing with them. Game over. That's it. It's just like with Russia and the United States, what's kept us at bay with one another is the fact that both countries have nukes. If both countries, Iran and Israel, have nukes, it's like Pakistan and India. I mean, you just have to work it out. You guys cannot continue to have this talk of war. Anytime there's a talk of a direct war between India or Pakistan, people try to cool the jets. Same thing with United States and Russia. So if Iran has nukes, it would be the same sort of discussion. It would be, hey guys, you're going to have to work it out some other way. We can't allow a war to happen. But instead, there's this constant saber rattling towards Iran. Like, we're going to go to war. You got the Lindsey Grahams of the world stomping around. We're going to go to war with you. We're going to go. You better watch out. But so it works for the military industrial complex to deny. And also, of course, Iran would deny, just like Israel denies. But it would work for the military industrial complex to have this denial. That works for the propaganda, actually, more than, yeah, they have nukes. So what is if I were the leader of Iran and I see what goes on around the world, I see how the United States behaves towards countries that don't have nukes, I'd want nukes. That to me just makes logical sense. And the Iranians aren't stupid. So do the Iranians have nukes?
Well, the argument that you make is an argument that many in Iran are making, and they are calling on the leader to change his position. So far, he hasn't done that, and I'm confident that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. Iran is a nuclear threshold state. It is one of the 10 most advanced countries when it comes to nuclear energy. And Iran's missile capabilities, as you've seen, people have witnessed, are very advanced. So for Iran, it would be a very swift process. My understanding is that they could make a nuclear weapon, a usable nuclear weapon, in a very short period of time. But Iran doesn't want nuclear weapons because the issue is not just the Israeli regime. The issue is also other countries in the region. If Iran develops a nuclear weapon, then you'll see countries like Saudi Arabia, which are not inherently stable because it's a single family and one person who's in charge. And the country, if something happens to them, the country could fall apart. It's not like Iran or like Egypt or like Iraq or Syria, which has it's a tribal. Saudi Arabia is a tribal land. It's named after a family. So Saudi Arabia then would seek nuclear weapons. Others would seek nuclear weapons, and the neighborhood would be full of countries gradually that all have nuclear weapons. And if a country grows unstable, then that could be dangerous. There could be circumstances where Iran would develop a nuclear weapon. Senior Iranian officials have said that. Dr. Kharazi, and the foreign affairs, one of the two foreign affairs advisors to the leader, has said that if there's an existential threat to Iran or Iran's nuclear program, then Iran will change its nuclear posture. And Iran's nuclear program is basically deep underground, and it's not something that the Israelis could destroy. Whether the Americans can destroy it or not, I don't know. But Iran does have quite good air defenses. We saw that during the Israeli regime strike. But it's an ongoing debate in Iran. Many people see it as you do. They think that we should have a nuclear weapon. I don't believe that that earthquake was an explosion. And I don't know anything about nuclear energy, but I think nowadays they can do a lot of these tests just through computers and simulations. But it's not something that I know anything about. I could be wary about talking too much about things which I'm ignorant of.
So essentially, Iran's a nuclear power. I mean, if you can make a nuke within a week or two, and we've been hearing that for years now. Iran is 2 nukes, 2 weeks away from a nuke, 2 weeks away. Well, it's been way past 2 weeks.
We've been there for 30 years, according to Netanyahu.
Right. So I mean, if Iran is that so basically knowing that, okay, you can strike Iran, but they'll strike back pretty quickly. They could develop a nuke really, really quickly. That's good as having one, essentially. And whether or not Israel has one, I now for the first time question whether or not they have nukes. I just don't think they do. I think they're crazy enough to use them. So I think that Israel's, the narrative behind Israel having nukes, they've got a grip on the United States, and the United States has a lot of nukes. So Israel can procure a nuke from the United States. At least they claim, they would be able to essentially, they have nukes, because they've got our nukes, and Iran can make a nuke. So you essentially have 2 nuclear powers, and it's not wise for either of them to go at each other the same way it isn't wise for Russia and the United States or Pakistan and India. And so that, to me, having nukes it has operated as a deterrent between these countries.
Well, Iran also has, that is, as you rightly point out, that's a balance of terror. But I think Iran also has another means to establish a balance of terror, and that is the very fact that all the oil and gas facilities and infrastructure across the Persian Gulf and the region is very easy for Iran to destroy.
Right.
And if push comes to shove, if the Iranians and the United States get into a conflict, the Iranian capabilities are infinitely greater than Ansarullah in Yemen. And we've seen what Ansarullah has done with what it has. And Iran can, devastate the Persian Gulf region. So I think there's a balance of terror on that front. There's a balance of terror when it comes to nuclear energy. But then again, we're living in the world where American leaders are now using their soldiers to fire ATACMS inside Russia, and now the French and the British are also getting involved. So there's we live in very crazy times.
Right, we do. One last question for you. We're seeing a reestablishment of a relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And, it looks like the Middle East is trying to maybe shift their relationships with Iran. What do you make of that? Do you think that why would the Saudis be embracing Iran now?
Well, the whole region and beyond is now disgusted with the Israeli regime, and people across the region are outraged. And it is delegitimizing governments. You see people in Turkey. I was in Turkey during the anniversary of October the 7th, and a lot of my friends who were part of the ruling party were openly attacking Erdogan for continuing to facilitate the export of oil from Baku, cheap oil from Baku, to the Israeli regime, and to continue allowing for indirect trade. And the same is true elsewhere. So in Jordan and Egypt, everywhere, people are becoming increasingly outraged. We saw just a couple of days ago an Israeli extremist rabbi. He was killed in the United Arab Emirates. Apparently, there were 3 Uzbeks, and they were caught in Turkey, and apparently the Turkish government is sending them back to the Emirates. But that is going to cause even further anger in Turkey, and I think in the Emirates, people are outraged too. So Saudi Arabia is being forced to move further away from the Israeli regime in the United States because their population expects that. They expect all these Arab countries in the region, except for Hezbollah, except for Yemen, except for Syria and Iraq, they've all just been watching, and some of them have been cooperating with the Israelis. So they are under a lot of pressure to tilt away from the Israeli regime, to tilt away from the United States. And this is going to have long-term consequences for the Americans. The United States is now despised across the region. People across the region hate the United States. They hate their allies. They hate the Israeli regime. So it's going to be impossible for politicians in this region to cooperate with the Israelis in future. Things have changed. Not only has the global balance of power tilted away from the West and the United States economically and politically and militarily, as we're seeing in Ukraine, for example, but also when it comes to soft power, the United States and the Europeans are in a horrible place because they are seen as partners in this crime. So the world is changing, but instead of behaving more reasonably and rationally, the Americans continue to support genocide in Gaza, slaughter in Lebanon and Syria, killings in the West Bank, the occupied West Bank, and to give Ukraine or to send their own soldiers to fire ATACMS into Russia as well. These are extraordinary, extraordinary times.
Professor Marandi, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insight.
A ceasefire between Hezbollah and the Lebanese army and the IDF. Why would Netanyahu agree on a ceasefire if his army was so strong and he was pushing Hezbollah back?
Well, for Netanyahu, the situation had reached an impasse, and that's what members of Netanyahu's national security team, cabinet, were telling the media sort of privately. They'd run out of targets. They were killing Hezbollah figures who were on the political side, who operated openly, who had no military involvement, like Mohammed Afif, the spokesman. And meanwhile, the citizens of the north, the Jewish Israeli citizens of the north, the Galilee, were not able to return home. We're talking about over 100,000 people. So Netanyahu is under mounting pressure. Netanyahu believes that he can interpret the terms of the deal very liberally and sell it back to his population as a victory. And while Netanyahu achieved no victory whatsoever, neither did Hezbollah. And it's going to be a really shaky truce. I wouldn't even call it a ceasefire that will likely be broken by Israel in the coming days. I mean, in the past few hours, they've already abducted people in southern Lebanon and claimed that they're Hezbollah operatives. And you could see how they ended with a message to the overall population of Lebanon, people outside of the realm of resistance in central Beirut, including on Hamra, which is where you'll see women walking in bikini tops, the sort of hearkening back to the days when Beirut was the Paris of the Middle East. Attacking Hamra is a message to the whole population that Israel will collectively punish them if they continue to allow Hezbollah to operate in their midst. So clearly Israel wants to see some kind of civil war, and the population remove Hezbollah before the next round, which will not happen. So Netanyahu is on shaky ground. He did not achieve any real victory in a true sense, but neither did Hezbollah. Hezbollah merely survived and demonstrated that it could continue to hit back until the end. And they were in a very difficult, if not impossible, situation from the beginning, from October 8th on.
How many casualties did the IDF suffer, or will we never know the true number because the Netanyahu regime won't release them?
We won't know, but one thing I was noticing in the last days was in southern Lebanon in the villages as the Israeli army sought to push toward the Litani River. A lot of the soldiers they were losing were younger, closer to age 18. The reservist forces were unable to maintain the same coherence they had after October 7th. There were reports in Israeli media about the reservist corps basically collapsing. And so the morale was definitely weakening within the Israeli military, but Israel always maintained escalation dominance. And that's the problem for Hezbollah, was that there's this air bridge of 2,000-pound GBU bombs from the US through Dover Air Base going straight to Israel's Nevatim Air Base, and they could just basically bombard Beirut as long as they wanted, as well as southern Lebanon and Tyre. The city of Tyre was heavily destroyed. So they didn't need the ground troops that they relied on so heavily in 2006. This was, for Israel, it was an air war, just attacking the civilian population. And they succeeded in part of their doctrine, which is what they call mowing the lawn, which is cutting resistance down to size for the next round, killing a generation of leaders. Most of the Hezbollah Jihad Council was killed. Hezbollah's leader, longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah, was killed. Many field commanders were killed. But Hezbollah held on. They managed to maintain rocket fire into Haifa and even hit Tel Aviv all the way till the end. They hit Netanyahu's bedroom with a drone. They scored a big success in the Binyamina attack, hitting an Israeli army base precisely with the drone. But their rocket fire was suppressed because of the early successes, tactical success of the Israeli military in attacking munitions bases in the days after the pager attack, which was extremely demoralizing. So looking back, Hezbollah didn't want this war. It was forced into it because of the Al-Aqsa flood, October 7th attack by Hamas, which Hezbollah had no idea was coming. The political leadership of Hamas had no idea that that was coming. And after that, for ideological and moral reasons, Hassan Nasrallah had to get involved in this war on October 8th. Hezbollah was not ready. They knew that Israel had escalation dominance. And so they fought a war that was basically a half war just to keep the residents of the northernmost settlements in Israel away, with the goal, the strategy of forcing Israel to do a ceasefire in Gaza, because for philosophical and moral reasons, they had to act on behalf of the Palestinian struggle. There was no way that Hezbollah could have sat this out without losing total credibility among its own constituency and the world. But at the same time, they couldn't go all the way and push as hard as they wanted. So when Israel finally turned its attention to Lebanon and to Hezbollah after it achieved the weakening of Hamas, Hezbollah was extremely vulnerable and they hadn't hit Israel hard enough. So there was this quandary, and Nasrallah had suggested that he would even be targeted and assassinated because of the quandary he was in. He was unable to escape Israel's bunker buster bombs. And so here we are at a ceasefire after Hezbollah had been delinked from the Gaza cause and was fighting purely for the Lebanese front. Once Netanyahu achieved that, or the Israeli army achieved the delinking, and then was able to just punish the Lebanese population, kill a number of leaders, I think they decided, let's call it a day because our own population's under pressure. And then there were domestic concerns for Netanyahu as well. He's under pressure, not just from the Ashkenazi elite, the middle class in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, over this Haredi draft bill, the bill to draft the ultra-Orthodox, because the Israeli public has paid a price since October 7th. Many deaths, injuries in the war, guys going into the reserves, losing their small businesses because they've been in the field for so long. And then you have this whole population of the ultra-Orthodox who study Torah all day. So they're mad at them, but they're not the only ones now. The religious nationalists, the ones who wear the cloth kippot, the kippas,
Right.
like Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir's followers, they also served in the Israeli military. they want the ultra-Orthodox to serve as well. They actually want to capture them, get them out of their anti-Zionist synagogues and get them into this messianic religious nationalist world. And so Netanyahu's under pressure from his own coalition, and he has the ultra-Orthodox parties in his coalition as well, who are dead set against the bill. So the war basically had to end for Netanyahu in the north to relieve that pressure. Now, what's next on the agenda? Number one, settlements in Gaza. Let's give the religious nationalist camp that's given so much. Let's give them settlements in northern Gaza. Let's keep the ethnic cleansing going in the north. That's something Bezalel Smotrich 2 days ago said was part of the agenda, and that the goal was to depopulate Gaza by half. Number two on the agenda, focus on Iran. Start carrying out more sabotage attacks on Iran, attack Iranian shipping, focus the entire military on preparing to utterly destroy Iran's leadership. That's what Netanyahu is thinking right now. And the US has given him an opportunity to do that.
Was this a victory for Netanyahu or a concession?
It was neither. And, I just think we're in this interregnum between the next stage of the conflict. And, unfortunately for the resistance, which has always known this because of the US backing, Israel maintains escalation dominance, but the ball is in Iran's court, and I can't really speak to what they have in store.
Revolutionary salute to our Queen Yaya for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. I see you still up.
Was there any resistance? I think I saw one negative vote in the Israeli cabinet to the ceasefire with Hezbollah.
Yeah, I mean, there were residents of the north who spoke out against it to Israeli news channels and said, we wanted to go back, but you promised to utterly destroy Hezbollah, and you haven't done that. And I think there's an added dimension here, which is that Netanyahu's promised goals will probably never be achieved. He promised to completely destroy Hamas and completely destroy Hezbollah, and he failed. But at the same time, he denied Hezbollah what was probably an impossible victory from the beginning by refusing a ceasefire in Gaza because of the pressure in the north. And I say impossible from the beginning, from the point of view of a non-state group, one of the best organizations, one of the masters of asymmetrical warfare. You don't want to be in a situation where your victory is contingent on your enemy doing something it doesn't want to do. And that's the situation Hezbollah found itself in on October 8th. So Netanyahu has at least denied Hezbollah a victory, even as Hezbollah sort of held on. And what he's hoping for, what I think the US is hoping for, you've had the US ambassador in Beirut say this, they're hoping for a more like a civil war situation in Beirut with the population turning against Hezbollah at this point. And so what they're going to try to do is torture the Lebanese economy, try to deny Hezbollah the opportunity to rearm or rebuild, immiserating the Shia population in the south and southern Beirut, as well as the rest of the population. And so it's going to be a tough time for Lebanon.
And in the meanwhile, the killing continues in Gaza.
And it doesn't look like there will be a ceasefire in Gaza. It looks like a permanent war from this point on. There's no pressure on Netanyahu or on the Israeli leadership, military leadership at all, to leave Gaza. They have this plan to divide Gaza into three. There's the Netzarim corridor, which cuts the north off, which has basically become a series of military bases that is 2 kilometers wide. Netanyahu has even visited the Netzarim corridor, I believe. Hamas is still in the field. They're still fighting. The population in the north is starving. The population overall across Gaza is in tents, and buying a tent is very expensive. And right now it's the winter season. It's the rainy season. Tents are flooding. People are having to move away from the beach because of the flooding. I mean, the level of misery there is unspeakable. And Netanyahu, not just Netanyahu, but the entire Israeli leadership has free reign there and less pressure than before because of the ceasefire in the north.
Here's Netanyahu earlier today articulating what he says are the three reasons for the ceasefire. Chris, cut number 16.
So why have a ceasefire now? Three main reasons for it. One, focusing on the Iranian threat. And I'm not going to go into and expand on that. Two, refreshing our forces and getting armaments. I'm not going to hide it from you. There were many delays in getting armaments and weapons, and this is going to soon. This is going to open up. We will have the armaments. We'll save our soldiers' lives, and will give us additional force to complete our task. And third reason for the ceasefire: separating Hamas and this front. From the first day of the war, Hamas planned from the beginning that Hezbollah will be at its side. But when Hezbollah is not in the picture, Hamas will be alone. And this will aid us in our sacred goal to release our hostages.
Does this make sense to you, or is this Bibi trying to make himself look better than he is?
Obviously, he's interpreting the terms liberally. He's touting achievements that didn't take place and promising goals that cannot be achieved, like the release of the hostages through pure military action. I mean, last week we saw him desperately offering $5 million bounties for hostages. This is not something you do if you're confident that you can get hostages out. Many of them may be dead. We saw a female hostage die from the same conditions that people in northern Gaza are dying of. And this has been happening throughout, that the hostages and captives would die because everyone in Gaza is dying from bombing, from starving. Point number two that Netanyahu made about being unable to or having difficulties rearming contains political undertones aimed at Biden and the Democrats in Washington, even though Trump has won, as one Israeli news outlet reported, causing Netanyahu and his team to dance the hora. But Tel Aviv Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, key ally of Netanyahu in Washington, falsely claimed that Biden had been withholding weapons, and that is why Netanyahu had to carry out the ceasefire, had to agree to the ceasefire and the concessions. I mean, and this is just something they're going to continue. Republicans in Washington will continue to say about the Democrats when Joe Biden's true legacy is Genocide Joe. And one other point about victors and losers. I don't think there are any victors or losers here, but if there is one loser, it's Israel's image. That is the real defeat that Israel suffered since October 7th. Its image will never recover. Its economy may never recover or may be distorted for a generation. And Netanyahu's image is fatally damaged. He's someone who cannot travel now to parts of Western Europe. I just saw this film, The Bibi Files, which is effectively banned inside Israel. It's coming out in the US. It will be a major release. It is an anti-Netanyahu film. In some ways, I think it's kind of a dangerous film because it comes at Netanyahu from a liberal Zionist perspective, making him seem like he's at fault for the entire crisis that Israel's in and for the genocide in Gaza, when Netanyahu is simply an exponent of Zionism, and Zionism itself is the issue here. So the film is in many ways liberal Zionist propaganda, but it's also deep state propaganda from the US. It's produced by someone named Alex Gibney, who is he's one of the best documentary makers working today, but he's also a Democratic Party propagandist who made a film about Russiagate during the Trump era, and who speaks not just for the Democratic Party, but I think many elements within the national security and State Department bureaucracy that see Netanyahu as a criminal, as a tyrant, And the
Right.
film also gives voice to the part of the Israeli public that Netanyahu does not want in the street protesting him. So for a film to be made of this caliber, of this level, really speaks to the PR defeat that Netanyahu personally and Israel in general has suffered.
Is this the film that actually airs clips of Netanyahu and his wife's interrogation by Israeli police?
Yeah, the film is based around those clips. And so it's based around interrogations of Netanyahu, his wife, and people who gave them gifts, including Sheldon and Miriam Adelson, who kind of throw Netanyahu under the bus in these interrogations. The level of corruption actually seems minuscule and petty compared to what we see in the United States. But the film overall is a vehicle for destroying Netanyahu's image in the English-speaking world, using a corruption trial that was mostly only known within the Hebrew-speaking world. So that's why I think it's significant. And then it deals with Netanyahu, the war criminal, at the end.
How has the Israeli public received the indictment and issuance of an arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Gallant?
Well, the Israeli public is divided, but there's a fear there, which is that every Israeli, woman or man, has to be conscripted into the military at age 18. So they all feel like they could be targets for following the orders of these characters. And the level of criminality and sadism displayed by the Israeli public through this citizens or people's military that we've seen recorded in a more intimate, comprehensive fashion than in any war in human history in Gaza and Lebanon is off the charts. So they should be afraid. And what Lindsey Graham said is true as well, that after they come for them, they will come for our leaders, and they should. There should be an investigation into Tony Blinken's role in this war, colluding with Netanyahu's military to obstruct humanitarian aid. There should be an investigation into the entire Biden team, as well as the propagandists who sold the war. I don't think it will go that far, but there's a clear precedent here. It also freaks out the American exceptionalists, the imperialists at the Washington Post editorial board, who said the ICC is actually supposed to be, I mean, they didn't say this, but this is what they meant. It's really supposed to be the International Caucasian Court. We're only supposed to go after brown and black tin pot dictators. We're not supposed to go after, we're not supposed to go after Jews like Netanyahu and American leaders. And this is not what the court is for. We're supposed to have two systems of justice in the world. And that has been shattered and upended by this precedent set by the court, which puts us in a new era, an era in which anyone who believes in international law has to understand that either the authors of this genocide get prosecuted or international law is utterly meaningless.
Here's Senator Graham on the ICC. See if you can tell who he's talking about, Max. Cut number 9.
This is a legitimate complaint in our eyes and would ask the ICC to investigate. You can find yourself in The Hague if you have a scorched earth policy. So the world is watching you to hold one of the most vicious people on the planet finally accountable. Enough of the murder, enough of destruction and carnage on your behalf. There'll come a day when the rule of law will trump the rule of the gun.
Now, sounds like he's talking about Netanyahu, but he was talking about Putin when Putin was indicted because they picked up children whose parents had been killed, and the ICC accused him of kidnapping. But it is interesting how the Americans, in this case, one of the more bellicose neocons and Zionists, will find that the ICC jurisdiction is legitimate when the target of it is someone they hate rather than someone they revere.
To people like Tony Blinken or Joe Biden, the rules-based order represents the post-World War II international legal and multilateral system that the U.S. helped construct and which it leads. And when I say leads, I basically mean manipulates. And that rules-based order would not have collapsed so decisively and so rapidly after Israel began its genocide after October 7th. Had the Biden administration not gone in so strong on the Ukraine proxy war, along with a cast of bipartisan allies like the Senate's chief neocon, Lindsey Graham, not only welcoming the ICC warrant for Vladimir Putin for not any crimes committed in Bucha or any massacre or bombing of hospitals or anything like that, but for evacuating Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian children from the war zone when they were under the bombing of the Ukrainian army. It was a bizarre warrant, and it was constructed with, as we exposed at the Gray Zone, with research by someone named Nathaniel Raymond at Yale University, who is funded by the State Department. The State Department basically funded the research that comprised the bulk of the warrant, which Karim Khan, the ICC prosecutor, who was installed basically by the UK, authored. And that's what Karim Khan was supposed to do. No one expected him to actually turn around and indict Netanyahu and Gallant, but the credibility of the entire ICC and the international legal system hung in the balance, and he had to do this.
Yeah.
So this obviously is what infuriates Lindsey Graham, whose hypocrisy is on bold display there, as is every institution, FIFA, the United European Football Association, for banning Russia immediately after it invaded Ukraine, while letting Israel and its band of thugs rove around the world for matches and international play.
Last topic with you. You and Aaron and I have discussed at length the assaults on free speech by the Biden administration, by members of Congress, like Elise Stefanik, as an example, who's slated to become Trump's ambassador to the UN. I think you'll agree with me that this is about to get worse. Here is Pam Bondi, the designee to be Attorney General of the United States, suggesting that demonstrators on college campuses should be deported at worst or interrogated by FBI agents at best. Cut number 14.
Whether they're here as Americans or if they're here on student visas and they're out there saying, I support Hamas, you and I have seen that on all of these television shows. Frankly, they need to be taken out of our country, or the FBI needs to be interviewing them right away when they're saying, I support Hamas, I am Hamas. That's not saying I support all these poor Palestinians who are trapped in Gaza. That's not what they're saying. So I think their student visas need to be revoked. I think we need to reinstate President Trump's travel ban immediately. There's a lot of things that can be done to stop this. But yeah, the anti-Semitism that is rampant throughout this country now. And it's truly, truly heartbreaking to see what's happening to all of our Jewish friends in this country.
So this woman who's about to become the head of the Justice Department and indirectly the head of the FBI believes that the First Amendment notwithstanding, the government can evaluate the content of speech and decide which political speech is worthy of praise, which is worthy of interrogation, and which is worthy of kicking people out of the country. Worse than anything Joe Biden's DOJ ever even imagined.
Well, the Biden DOJ has helped set the stage for this. But let's look at how Pam Bondi came into the position as Trump's Attorney General nominee. It was the downfall of Matt Gaetz, who has taken one of the few members of Congress who has not taken Israel lobby money, who actually voted against one of the major aid supplementals to Israel, along with other members of the Freedom Caucus, mainly because it also was linked to Ukraine aid, but he did it. Matt Gaetz went down mainly because of this bizarre background he has and this saga that involved apparently sexual blackmail. And Pam Bondi comes in. She's welcomed by CNN. It appears Senate Democrats will let her slide through. She's been a longtime corporate lobbyist for GM, Amazon, Uber, and even Gulf monarchies. She's a corporate tool, and so that's why she'll sail through. But also, in the last hours of Matt Gaetz as AG nominee, the American Jewish Committee and Anti-Defamation League condemned him as an anti-Semite. And Pam Bondi appears, someone with a very clear record, working under Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who said he'll be the most pro-Israel governor in America, of shilling for Israel and advancing Israel's objectives politically and legally inside the United States on behalf of Tel Aviv, crushing the First Amendment and the rights of students and other Americans to organize against this genocide. And what I think we're going to see happen, and this is an agenda that's been spelled out in the Heritage Foundation's Project Esther, which was actually largely written by Christian right activists, Christian Zionists, is to seek terrorism designations for groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine, the groups leading the demonstrations in the streets, and then to begin to actually prosecute them and debank their activists, going to places like PayPal, Venmo, and ordering them basically to block transactions of anyone who's leading Palestine solidarity activity. I mean, this is all spelled out. And Bondi seems to be the perfect person to advance this authoritarian, anti-freedom, un-American agenda on behalf of Netanyahu and the Israeli apartheid regime.
Is there anybody in Trump's cabinet that's not an ardent Zionist?
I mean, it's MEGA. It's Make Israel Great Again. Right. And the ceasefire in Lebanon, the terms aren't really supposed to technically go in effect until Trump is in office. So that's another ominous sign.
Right. Max, thank you very much for your time. A short week, and I appreciate you jumping on like this. A happy
Russia, China, Iran, or the US. When it comes to global influence, few things hold as much weight as military power. But who holds the upper hand in today's volatile world? For decades, the United States was considered the unrivaled military giant, fueled by an enormous defense budget and unmatched technological advancements. However, the rise of nations like China, Russia, and Iran has complicated this narrative. As new global powers emerge and warfare evolves, the question looms larger than ever. Who truly reigns supreme on the battlefield? Let's see who's got the military muscle to only show off, and who can win a war. For decades, proponents of US military superiority have pointed to one figure above all: its massive defense budget, which stood at $876 billion in 2024. This staggering sum is more than the combined military expenditures of the next several countries, and on its face, it seems like a solid argument for American dominance. However, this argument is an example of exaggeration. One element is to cover the whole. Let's break it down. First, a large budget doesn't necessarily translate into operational effectiveness. The United States may have the world's highest military expenditure, but how efficiently is that money being spent? In 2018, a Pentagon audit revealed widespread inefficiencies and waste in military spending, with billions being allocated to outdated programs and initiatives that offer little strategic advantage in modern warfare. For instance, many experts have criticized the continued investment in aircraft carriers and large naval fleets, which are increasingly vulnerable to new types of missile technologies, like China's hypersonic weapons. Former Defense Secretary Robert Gates was once quoted saying, "If the Pentagon were a business, it would be out of business." Second, let's consider where the US military's budget is going. The United States maintains over 750 military bases in more than 80 countries around the world, a testament to its global reach. However, maintaining these bases and the logistical chains that support them is an enormous drain on resources. The US is spending more to maintain a global military presence that is arguably overstretched. Critics argue that this sprawling network, while impressive on paper, is more of a burden than a benefit, tying up financial and human resources that could be used to modernize its military technology or focus on emerging threats. Meanwhile, countries like China, with a far smaller defense budget of $291 billion, have demonstrated that they can achieve remarkable advancements in military capability by focusing on efficiency and strategic priorities. China has rapidly modernized its military, particularly in areas like cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and missile technology. In contrast to the US, China's People's Liberation Army (PLA) is laser-focused on specific goals, such as dominating the South China Sea and projecting power across Asia. This strategic focus has allowed China to achieve significant milestones in military technology and capability without the burden of maintaining hundreds of bases around the world. Consider China's advancements in hypersonic missile technology. In 2021, China successfully tested a hypersonic missile that orbited the Earth before striking its target. The US is still playing catch-up in this area. Hypersonic weapons are a game-changer because they can travel at speeds exceeding 5 times the speed of sound, making them incredibly difficult to detect and intercept. This technology alone could nullify much of the US's advantage in traditional naval and air power. In this context, China's smaller budget has allowed it to develop capabilities that can counterbalance and, in some cases, surpass US military strengths. Lastly, we must acknowledge that simply outspending your rivals doesn't guarantee victory. History shows examples of smaller, less well-funded militaries defeating more powerful adversaries through superior strategy, determination, and adaptability. The US high budget certainly affords it many advantages, but as we've seen in conflicts like Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, money and technology alone don't win wars. If money alone doesn't guarantee military supremacy, then what about technological advancements? Does the US still maintain a technological edge over emerging military powers? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. The common argument that the US military is technologically superior is often used to bolster claims of its overall dominance. What does it mean to be technologically superior? In modern warfare, military power is no longer defined by the number of tanks, planes, or soldiers a country possesses. Instead, the focus has shifted toward advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, cyber warfare capabilities, hypersonic missiles, and space dominance. While the US leads in some areas, it is far from the undisputed technological leader across the board. Let's start with hypersonic weapons. China and Russia have both made significant strides in this area, leaving the US scrambling to catch up. Hypersonic missiles, which travel at speeds exceeding Mach 5, are a direct challenge to the US's dominance in missile defense and air superiority. According to a 2021 Pentagon report, China successfully tested a hypersonic missile that orbited the Earth and struck a target within China. This technological breakthrough sent shockwaves through the US military establishment because hypersonic weapons can evade existing missile defense systems. The United States, despite its enormous budget, has yet to field a comparable system, and its hypersonic programs have suffered from delays and budget overruns. Russia, too, has been investing heavily in advanced missile technology. In 2018, President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia had developed a new generation of hypersonic weapons, including the Avangard, a hypersonic glide vehicle capable of carrying nuclear warheads. Putin described these weapons as invincible against US missile defenses. While some Western analysts were initially skeptical of these claims, US intelligence has since confirmed that Russia's hypersonic capabilities are indeed a serious threat. Now let's consider the realm of cyber warfare, an increasingly critical domain in modern military strategy. The United States is undoubtedly a major player in the cyber domain, but China and Russia have made significant advancements that challenge US dominance. China, in particular, has been accused of conducting numerous cyber espionage campaigns against US government agencies, corporations, and defense contractors. In 2020, US officials accused China of hacking into networks associated with the F-35 fighter jet program, stealing valuable design and technology secrets. As a result, China was able to accelerate the development of its fifth-generation fighter, the J-20, which some analysts believe may soon rival the F-35 in capability. And while they claim China is so far behind that it needs to copy the US, they have forgotten that this claim shows how vulnerable their defense is. Russia, meanwhile, has demonstrated its cyber prowess through a series of high-profile attacks on Western targets. The SolarWinds cyber attack in 2020, attributed to Russian state-sponsored hackers, compromised the networks of numerous US government agencies, including the Department of Defense. This attack was a stark reminder that even the most powerful militaries can be vulnerable to invisible threats. As former US cybersecurity coordinator Michael Daniel stated, "In the realm of cyber warfare, the US no longer enjoys uncontested superiority. Our adversaries have caught up, and in some cases, they have surpassed us." In addition to cyber warfare, space is becoming an increasingly contested domain. The US has historically dominated space exploration and satellite technology, but China and Russia are rapidly closing the gap. China's ambitious space program has achieved several milestones in recent years, including landing a rover on the moon's far side and launching a new space station. In 2021, China's space program made headlines when it conducted a test of a satellite-mounted robotic arm capable of capturing and disabling other satellites. This kind of space technology has significant military implications, as disabling US military satellites could cripple communications and intelligence gathering in a conflict. So, while the US remains a technological powerhouse, it is no longer alone at the top. China and Russia have made significant advancements in hypersonic weapons, cyber warfare, and space technology, posing serious challenges to US dominance. The ambiguity of technological superiority means that the US can no longer claim an unchallenged lead in these critical areas of modern warfare. With the United States facing technological competition, let's turn to another key metric of military power: traditional military assets like tanks, planes, and ships. Do these old measures of military strength still matter in today's world? When we think of a powerful military, we often imagine vast fleets of tanks, aircraft, and ships. The United States, by traditional metrics, still holds an impressive lead in these areas. For example, the US operates 11 aircraft carriers, more than the rest of the world combined. It has the most advanced stealth bombers and a highly capable fleet of fighter jets, including the F-22 and F-35. On paper, this would seem to indicate unassailable military power, but aircraft carriers, once the crown jewel of naval power, are increasingly vulnerable to modern missile technologies. China, in particular, has developed anti-ship ballistic missiles, such as the DF-21D, which are specifically designed to target aircraft carriers. These carrier-killer missiles have a range of over 900 miles and can strike moving targets with precision. In the event of a conflict in the South China Sea, where US aircraft carriers are often deployed to project power, China's anti-ship missiles could significantly undermine US naval superiority. Russia has also shifted its focus away from traditional military assets in favor of strategic nuclear forces and asymmetric warfare capabilities. Russia's tank fleet, while still formidable, has been overshadowed by its investments in advanced missile systems and electronic warfare capabilities. In 2018, Russia demonstrated its electronic warfare prowess in Syria, where it was able to disrupt US communications and GPS signals during military operations. This is a clear example of how traditional assets like tanks and jets, while still important, are no longer the sole determinants of military strength. Additionally, the rise of asymmetric warfare, where smaller, unconventional forces can effectively challenge larger militaries, further complicates the relevance of traditional metrics. Iran, for instance, has leveraged asymmetric tactics to great effect. Its use of proxy forces in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen has allowed it to extend its influence without relying on a large conventional military. In 2019, Iranian-backed militias launched a series of drone and missile attacks on Saudi oil facilities, temporarily halting half of the kingdom's oil production. Despite having a much smaller military, Iran's ability to disrupt global oil markets demonstrated the effectiveness of asymmetric warfare in achieving strategic objectives. Moreover, the number of tanks, planes, or ships a country possesses is increasingly irrelevant in a world where cyber and electronic warfare play a pivotal role. The US military may have the most advanced fighter jets, but if its GPS systems are hacked or its communication networks are disrupted, those jets become significantly less effective. In a 2020 report, the US Government Accountability Office, GAO, warned that many US military systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks, highlighting the growing importance of cybersecurity over traditional military assets. So, while the US still maintains an impressive array of traditional military assets, these numbers alone no longer guarantee military superiority. The growing threat of anti-ship missiles, electronic warfare, and asymmetric tactics has rendered many of these assets vulnerable or less relevant in modern conflicts. If traditional military assets are losing relevance, what about the role of alliances in maintaining military power? Does the US still control the world's most powerful military alliances, or are new alliances emerging to challenge its dominance? One of the key factors in the United States' military dominance has been its vast network of alliances, particularly NATO. For decades, NATO has served as a bulwark against Russian aggression and a symbol of US leadership in global security. While the US has historically relied on its alliances to project power, recent developments suggest that these alliances are no longer as strong or cohesive as they once were. Meanwhile, China, Russia, and Iran are forging new alliances that threaten to challenge the US-led global order. NATO, the cornerstone of US military alliances, is facing significant internal divisions. In 2019, French President Emmanuel Macron famously declared NATO to be experiencing brain death, citing a lack of coordination among member states and divergent national interests. Disputes over defense spending have been a recurring issue within NATO, with the US constantly pressuring its European allies to contribute more to their defense. As a result, NATO has been weakened by internal friction, with some member states questioning the US commitment to collective defense, particularly after the chaotic US withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. At the same time, China and Russia are building a new axis of power through organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. Founded in 2001, the SCO has grown into a significant political, economic, and military alliance that includes China, Russia, India, and Pakistan as full members, with Iran recently admitted as an observer state. The SCO has held joint military exercises, conducted counter-terrorism operations, and strengthened political and economic ties among its members. This growing cooperation between China, Russia, and their allies represents a shift away from the US-led alliance system toward a more multipolar world. In addition to the SCO, China and Russia have deepened their bilateral military cooperation. In 2022, the two countries conducted joint naval exercises in the Sea of Japan, signaling their intent to challenge US naval dominance in the region. This partnership extends beyond military exercises. China and Russia have also been working together on missile defense, cyber warfare, and space exploration. The growing military cooperation between these two great powers is a direct challenge to US dominance in Eurasia. Iran, too, has sought to strengthen its military alliances with both China and Russia. In 2019, Iran, Russia, and China held their first ever joint naval exercises in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Oman. These exercises were a clear signal to the United States that its rivals are capable of coordinating military efforts in critical regions like the Middle East, where US influence has traditionally been dominant. Iran's inclusion in these exercises underscores its growing military cooperation with China and Russia, further challenging US influence in the region. As the US-led alliance system faces increasing strain, China, Russia, and Iran are building a new network of alliances that threaten to undermine US military dominance. With alliances shifting and new coalitions forming, let's examine how unconventional forms of warfare, such as cyber warfare and asymmetric tactics, are redefining what it means to be a military superpower in the 21st century. So, is there a single dominant military power, or is the concept of global military supremacy more fragmented than ever before? In the modern world, defining who holds global military power is not as simple as it once was. The question is not just about who spends the most money, has the largest number of troops, or commands the most advanced technologies. Today's global military dominance is more nuanced, reflecting a blend of traditional strength, strategic innovation, and geopolitical influence. Let's begin by acknowledging that military power has become contextual. The United States is still undoubtedly the strongest military force in terms of global reach, but regional powers like China and Russia are increasingly asserting their dominance within specific spheres of influence, effectively challenging the notion of a single, unchallenged superpower. One of the most striking developments is that military power is now multidimensional. The idea of dominance based purely on conventional forces, fighter jets, tanks, and ships, is being challenged by newer, more subtle forms of influence. Cyber warfare, intelligence operations, and economic pressure have become crucial tools in the modern arsenal, often blurring the lines between peace and conflict. In this regard, Russia has proven incredibly effective. Despite not having the same vast resources as the US or China, it leverages hybrid warfare, a combination of cyber attacks, disinformation, and selective military intervention to extend its influence well beyond what its traditional military assets would suggest. It has redefined the use of military power in a way that doesn't rely solely on conventional superiority. Similarly, China's rise has shown that military dominance doesn't necessarily mean engaging in direct conflict. China's expanding reach through economic leverage and its territorial assertiveness in the South China Sea represent a more strategic, calculated form of military power. China has built artificial islands and placed military installations in key shipping lanes, securing geopolitical advantage without the need for large-scale military engagement. This kind of power projection, focused on long-term strategic influence rather than immediate military confrontations, is increasingly shaping global military realities. Moreover, technological power is becoming an essential component of global dominance. While the US has led in areas like aerospace and stealth technologies, its competitors are catching up in other domains. China's advancements in quantum computing and artificial intelligence point to a future where military power may hinge less on conventional armies and more on autonomous warfare systems. The battlefield of tomorrow will likely be one of drones, AI-driven decision-making, and cyber warfare, where the speed of adaptation to these technologies will determine military superiority. And then there is the question of resilience. Military power today isn't just about projecting strength outward. It's also about defending against new and unexpected threats. The COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, demonstrated that non-traditional crises can deeply affect even the most powerful militaries. The ability to respond to these types of threats, protect critical infrastructure, and maintain order in times of global upheaval is becoming a defining element of true military power. Nations that can combine their traditional military assets with resilience against pandemics, climate crises, and cyber threats will lead the future. So, who truly holds global military power today? The answer may lie in distributed dominance. Rather than a single, overarching superpower, we are witnessing the emergence of a multipolar world where different nations dominate in different arenas. So, in the end, the notion that the United States holds uncontested military supremacy is becoming increasingly difficult to defend. From the inefficiencies of its massive defense budget to the vulnerability of its technological assets, and from the growing influence of alternative alliances to the rising importance of asymmetric and cyber warfare, it's clear that the global balance of military power is shifting. As former US Secretary of Defense Robert Gates stated, the era of uncontested American dominance is over. In this new reality, military power is fluid and multifaceted, and the United States must adapt if it wants to maintain its position in a rapidly changing world. Who do you think is the global military power? Is there a single you can name? Let us know in the comments.
Oh, by the way, there was something else that happened with China. So apparently China found, what was it, $90 billion in gold? Did I get that right?
Well, China has hit the mother lode with the discovery of a massive gold reserve in South China's Hunan province. Chinese geologists identified more than 40 mineral veins located less than 2,000 meters underground with a worth of almost $83 billion. Scientists were using innovative technologies, including 3D geological mining, to look for precious metals. They estimate the total reserves in the area to be over 1,000 tons. Now, this comes as gold prices have soared recently and are set to reach record highs in the coming months. CGTN correspondent Sun Tenyuan brought us more details.
Now, Chinese geologists announced they have detected over 40 gold veins with a reserve of 300 tons of gold within a depth of 2,000 meters beneath the Wangu goldfield. Now, this site's gold reserve within a depth of 3,000 meters is further estimated to be over 1,000 tons. Now, that's worth about 600 billion yuan or over $80 billion US at current market prices. And Chinese geologists say it's a huge breakthrough, not only just for Hunan, but also for the whole country. Now, the Wangu goldfield is the largest gold deposit ever discovered in Hunan's history, and it's been 30 years since the gold deposit was first discovered. Now, even on a national scale, there are only about 5 gold mines of this site. Gold is considered as a hard currency globally and has always been a reliable stabilizer during times of political or economic uncertainty. It's a resource that nations can count on to navigate risks and challenges, whether they're financial, geopolitical, or industrial. So discovering more gold isn't just about adding to the reserves. It's about giving the country greater confidence and flexibility to face a wide range of uncertainties. And this massive discovery at Wangu Goldfield is a big win for China for sure. And like I said, it means more gold to strengthen the country's financial systems, provide economic stability and security, especially in today's complex global environment.
So China is already the world's largest gold producer.
and they just literally struck gold mine. and so I think they found a reserve that's about 1,000 metric tons of gold, which is a lot of gold. and gold is gonna go up, right? I mean, the way that U.S. is printing money like crazy. I mean, they're not even printing money anymore. They don't need to print money on paper. They're just like digitally adding a couple of zeros. so I mean, gold is going to be all the commodities going to be more valuable. And it's that's just going to so China is hedging right now. This is why China is hedging against all the U.S. craziness, including how U.S. is monetizing dollar hegemony as a weapon. So recently, China has offered dollar-denominated bonds in Saudi Arabia. So, like, people are like, wait, what the hell is China doing? China already hold a lot of dollars. Saudi Arabia is holding a lot of dollars. So why is China selling bonds in Saudi Arabia? Well, it actually makes sense if you think about it, because the whole U.S. financial hegemony rests on the dollar hegemony, and it rests on petrodollar. Because back in the 70s, Kissinger traveled to Saudi Arabia. It's like, okay, we're gonna move off the gold standard completely, but we need to back our money on something. So we're gonna tie dollar and oil together. So you're gonna make sure when you sell people oil, they will have to pay in U.S. dollars.
Petrodollar.
And that's the birth of the petrodollar. So anyone in the world right now, they need to import energy. They need to buy energy. They have to spend dollars. And all these Gulf monarchies, they're finding themselves like they find themselves end up with an influx with a lot of more money, more dollars than they know what to do with. So what do? Well, they invest in United States, whether real estate, stocks, or U.S. treasuries. And so that. and then back when U.S. still had manufacturing, then they will U.S. will sell Saudi manufactured goods, weapons, etc. to recycle that dollars back into the U.S. economy. That's how it used to work, right? And right now, U.S. strategy is, you know what? I'm gonna bomb. We're gonna create this. I'm going to light fire all across the globe. I'm going to touch a war in Europe, in Ukraine. I'm going to support Israel to destabilize Middle East. So nowhere is safe to park your money except in United States, except park your dollars in U.S. Treasury. And that way you can be used to continue to finance the U.S. military spend, right? It's a perfect scheme. So, China realized what's going on. That's why they have been reducing their treasury holdings, from one time high of 1.4 trillion. Now it's down to like about 700 billion, I believe. And,
really? They've gotten rid of that much of the dollar.
The treasury. So, but they still have a lot of dollars. Right, so they're not buying. They're getting these. China's getting the dollar from their trade surplus, which is priced in dollars. So they're like, okay, we don't want to park our money in treasury where United States government can just seize our money in the way they seize Russia's money. So they are investing those dollars in Belt and Roads projects. They're using those dollars to finance the building infrastructure, building ports in much of the global south. And what now with their Chinese bond offering in dollars, they are getting the same rate as United States government. So which means Chinese government now can borrow money in dollars at the same rate as the United States government. Think about that, right? So U.S. So one of the advantage of U.S. before is it can borrow. It can continually borrow money, and people will put their money into the U.S. Treasury bill because it's safe. But now China can borrow money at the same rate as the United States government, and the only did it to, it's an experiment, so they only offered 2 billion, right? 2 billion, but then it was oversubscribed 22 times. So that's how much demand it is for China issued dollar bonds. So there's a lot of Saudi prince sitting on mountains of US dollars. They want to park somewhere else other than US Treasury bills because they also go ahead.
Donald Trump is coming in and he seems to be hell-bent on China. Do you, I mean, is China concerned that they would do something similar to them as they did to Russia, basically stealing $300 billion, or what they did to Venezuela, where they stole all of that gold? I mean, for China to have that much dollars, doesn't it make them vulnerable on some level to the same tactics that were used against Russia? Or am I wrong?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, they still need goods from China. I mean, as much decoupling you want from China, you can't decouple everything. They still, like, even Raytheon Martin, even Raytheon and Lockheed Martin has said, oh, we can't completely decouple from China because we need rare earth from China, and so that's unrealistic to have a completely decoupling break with in the trade ties. But China they don't expect ties getting better, so they're hedging. I mean, they have been hedging for a long time, and this is why they're offering the dollar denominated bonds. So now instead of all the petrodollar flowing into U.S. Treasury, like what they used to do, what the U.S. economists call a virtuous cycle. Now some of those dollars, petrodollars, can flow into China, and then China uses dollars to continue to invest in the global South countries, and so now you see like that. It's China is not de-dollarizing, right? China is re-dollarizing, but keeping dollar just as a means of payment, right? Rather than a means to finance U.S. military. and so this is like China is playing Go while U.S. is still playing with checkers. And so this is where I don't think, whatever. China is prepared. China is prepared for the coming of Donald Trump, and this is why they're building extensive ties with the global South. They're expanding massively their footprint in investment in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. Now China's number one trading partner is no longer United States. It's ASEAN. It's ASEAN, Southeast Asia. Yes. And that ASEAN is a top export market now for China. So they are already like EVs, right? Like 100% or 300% tariffs on Chinese EV, whatever, which is prohibitive. There's no Chinese EV in the United States except that one Xiaomi SU7 that was imported by Ford CEO. Nobody can get a Chinese EV in the United States. So instead, China is selling them like hotcakes in Latin America, in Southeast Asia. I'm in Indonesia. I'm waiting for BYD to bring their latest entry-level EV to Indonesia, because that thing only costs like the cost between $9,000 to that thing only costs between $9,000 to $13,000. I mean, that's great value. And so I'm waiting for that.
And see, that's the rub. We can't compete with that. The rules-based order, and the reason why we're changing the rules-based order, we can't compete with that. Like in the old days, when the U.S. thought, well, we have a higher manufacturing, we are better at producing and better at creating technology and everything else. I think you get a situation where China can build an electronic vehicle that will be built here for like $50,000. I think like Musk, the lowest aspect of Tesla might be like $40,000. And they are building a machine that's just as good, if not better, for $9,000 to $13,000. And I saw their manufacturing plants. The entire thing is automated. Like the entire thing is basically being built by machines where you can take out a lot of the human labor out of it. No wonder they can build them for that cost. That's why we don't see them here. And we can't compete with those cars. I mean, it's astonishing. KJ, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy these conversations. You're very illuminating in these discussions, and you help give context to a lot of the stuff that's taking place around the world.
Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has met with China's leader Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the G20 summit. It marks the first time in more than 6 years that a British Prime Minister has met with President Xi.
This is Sir Keir Starmer meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. You can see Xi there, the handshake between the two. This is the first meeting at this level between the two countries in 6 years. And
I want to plan for full bilateral meeting with you and Premier Li in Beijing or London, and will ask my new National Security Advisor to follow up with your teams to prepare for this engagement.
Why is the UK cozying up to China after years of tension? Is Britain breaking up with the West? The UK, a traditional Western ally, is shaking hands with China, a nation it has publicly criticized for years. When Sir Keir Starmer met Xi Jinping at the recent G20 summit, it wasn't just another diplomatic handshake. It was a signal, a flashing neon sign. Things are changing. But why now? Why is the UK, facing mounting economic pressure and geopolitical challenges, choosing to reframe its relationship with China? Is this a bold strategy for survival in a fractured global order? Or is it a risky gamble that could backfire? Let's find out. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Money speaks louder than politics. And for the UK, the economic reality is impossible to ignore. China is a cash machine, and Britain is desperate for cash. Think of it this way. Post-Brexit Britain is like someone freshly divorced from a long-term partner in Europe. It's looking for new relationships to fill the gap, but its options are limited. The US, though an ally, isn't rolling out the red carpet for trade deals. Meanwhile, China, a global economic powerhouse, is standing there with open arms. The temptation is obvious. China and the UK are already deeply connected economically. Bilateral trade exceeds £100 billion annually, making China one of Britain's top trading partners. But there's potential for much more. Chancellor Rachel Reeves's recent visit to Beijing wasn't just about maintaining current trade levels. It was about growth. From financial services to green technology, the UK is eager to deepen ties with China to secure its economic future. Take British luxury brands as an example. Companies like Burberry and Jaguar Land Rover thrive in China thanks to its booming middle class. But beyond luxury goods, Britain sees untapped opportunities in emerging industries. Fintech is one such sector. The UK, a global hub for financial innovation, could benefit from partnering with Chinese firms to access vast consumer markets. And it's not just about what the UK can export. China's Belt and Road Initiative BRI presents opportunities for Britain to collaborate on infrastructure projects and investments. Imagine Chinese funds revitalizing Britain's aging infrastructure or British firms gaining access to BRI-linked markets in Asia and Africa. These synergies could redefine the economic relationship between the two nations. But economic collaboration isn't without risks. Critics argue that closer ties could make the UK overly dependent on China, especially in strategic sectors like technology and energy. The Huawei controversy is a case in point. While the UK initially allowed the Chinese telecom giant to participate in its 5G rollout, security concerns ultimately forced a U-turn. This back and forth highlights the delicate balancing act Britain must perform as it pursues economic engagement with China. So, can the UK separate business from politics? The answer may lie in an area where their interests align more naturally. climate change. Can climate change make frenemies collaborate? Forget geopolitics for a moment. Climate change doesn't care about borders, ideologies, or trade wars. It's the one issue that demands global cooperation, and the UK and China are uniquely positioned to lead the charge. The UK has set ambitious goals to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. But here's the problem. Achieving these targets requires resources, technology, and manufacturing capabilities that Britain simply doesn't have. China, on the other hand, is a renewable energy superpower. It produces more solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicle batteries than any other country. For the UK, this creates a clear opportunity. Recent talks between UK and Chinese officials have focused on joint ventures in green energy. Imagine British scientists and engineers working alongside Chinese manufacturers to develop next-generation renewable technologies. From hydrogen fuel cells to advanced energy storage systems, the potential for collaboration is enormous. But the partnership goes beyond technology. China and the UK have also been discussing strategies to combat biodiversity loss and support sustainable development in emerging economies. Both nations have played prominent roles in global climate summits. China hosted COP15, while the UK led COP26. Together, they could set the agenda for the next decade of environmental action. However, collaboration on climate change isn't just about saving the planet. It's also a geopolitical strategy. For the UK, working with China on green initiatives allows it to showcase leadership in an area where the US has been less consistent. By positioning itself as a bridge between East and West on climate issues, Britain can enhance its global standing. Climate diplomacy might be a feel-good story, but it doesn't erase the trust issues that have plagued UK-China relations for years. The question is, can these two nations truly build trust, or is this partnership doomed to be transactional? Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel for more videos about China's development, power, and influence on the world. Let's continue now. Trust doesn't come easy, especially when the relationship history is as rocky as the one between the UK and China. From Hong Kong to human rights abuses, there's a long list of grievances on both sides. So why is the UK trying to rebuild bridges now? The answer lies in pragmatism. Britain knows it can't afford to isolate itself on the global stage, especially post-Brexit. Engaging with China isn't about overlooking its flaws. It's about finding a way to coexist despite them. Take Keir Starmer's recent approach to diplomacy. Instead of publicly criticizing China's policies, he's opted for private discussions. This shift in tone reflects an understanding that progress requires dialogue, not confrontation. For example, Starmer's handling of the Jimmy Dore case, where he expressed concern over the pro-democracy activist's imprisonment without resorting to inflammatory rhetoric, demonstrates a more measured approach. But trust building isn't just about political gestures. The UK is investing in soft diplomacy initiatives, such as cultural exchanges and academic collaborations. These programs aim to foster understanding between the two nations at a grassroots level. Think student exchange programs, joint research projects, and increased language learning opportunities. While these efforts might seem small, they play a crucial role in laying the foundation for a more stable relationship. Still, trust can only go so far. As the UK rebuilds ties with China, it faces mounting pressure from its closest ally, the United States. This brings us to the next critical question. How can Britain navigate its relationship with China without alienating Washington? Here's the tricky part. The UK's pursuit of closer ties with China comes at a time when the US is ramping up its anti-China rhetoric. As one of America's closest allies, Britain is expected to toe the line. But post-Brexit Britain has other plans. Think back to the Huawei controversy. Despite intense pressure from Washington, the UK initially allowed Huawei to participate in its 5G network rollout. Although the decision was later reversed due to security concerns, it showed Britain's willingness to chart its path, even if it meant defying the US. Now, the stakes are even higher. The US sees China as its primary rival, and it expects its allies to fall in line. But the UK, eager to diversify its economy and assert its independence, is playing a different game. By framing its engagement with China as a matter of national interest, Britain is attempting to justify its actions without severing ties with Washington. This balancing act isn't just about trade or technology, it's about influence. Britain wants to position itself as a mediator in the US-China rivalry, advocating for dialogue rather than confrontation. But walking this tightrope is risky. Lean too far toward China, and Britain risks alienating its Western allies. Lean too far toward the US, and it misses out on opportunities with one of the world's largest economies. As the UK navigates this geopolitical chessboard, one question remains. Is this the start of a new golden era with China, or is it just a temporary alignment of interests? Theresa May's 2018 visit to China marked what many called the golden era of UK-China relations. But fast forward to today, and the world looks very different. Pandemic recovery, shifting power dynamics, and economic uncertainty have created a more cautious approach to diplomacy. That said, there's still potential for a renewed partnership. For the UK, China offers access to vast markets, investment opportunities, and leadership on global issues like climate change. For China, the UK represents a stable market and a potential ally in an increasingly divided Europe. But a golden era requires more than mutual benefits. It requires mutual trust. And that's where the challenge lies. Can the UK and China move beyond their differences to build a partnership that lasts? Or will geopolitical tensions derail their efforts before they even begin? As these two nations inch closer together, one thing is clear. The stakes couldn't be higher. So, will the UK's gamble pay off? Let's not sugarcoat it. The UK's engagement with China is a gamble. It's bold, risky, and controversial. But in a world where economic survival and climate leadership demand collaboration, Britain sees no other choice. The question is, can the UK balance its ambitions with its alliances? We would like to take a moment here and appreciate you all for commenting and sharing your opinions. Your insights always impress us. So, what do you think? Is Britain's strategy genius or reckless? Let us know in the comment section. Are we ready to see a world where US allies give US up for China? Do you want to watch more videos like this one?
With tensions rising in the Taiwan Strait, China has been conducting multiple military drills in the contested waters.
In our previous episodes, we've repeatedly mentioned how aircraft carriers are the backbone of a strong navy. China, the renowned aircraft carrier powerhouse, might be producing aircraft carriers at an impressive pace, but what's even more impressive is that the nation is also producing its versions of aircraft carrier killers on the side, and they're extremely deadly. A strong offense and even stronger defense, it seems like the Dragon is highly prepared for any conflict it might face. Today's episode will uncover China's significant increase in production of its deadly DF-26 aircraft killer missiles and why it's important. China's continued production of the DF-26B missile, known widely as the carrier killer, marks a powerful shift in the strategic play of the Indo-Pacific region only because of how deadly the weapon has the potential to be. This missile, now reportedly deployed in numbers exceeding 250, highlights China's unyielding dedication to counteracting US naval dominance. The People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, PLARF, has ramped up its deployment of these DF-26 intermediate-range ballistic missiles, signaling a proactive stance in its defense strategies. A good defense means a stronger offense, and China is playing just on that. With an impressive range of over 3,100 miles, the DF-26B missile's capability to reach and neutralize both naval and land-based targets positions it as a game-changer in any potential conflict scenario involving the United States. Its destructive potential lies not just in its remarkable reach, but in its adaptability. It can be equipped with either nuclear or conventional warheads weighing between 1,200 and 1,800 kg. This adaptability, paired with the missile's maneuverability, enables China to effectively position hundreds of these missiles across its region, presenting a formidable deterrent that stands ready to redefine the Indo-Pacific power structure. After all, how would the United States respond if its aircraft carriers, symbols of its naval power, faced such a direct threat? In recent months, the production of these DF-26B missiles has reached new heights. Beijing has significantly scaled up its production capacity, driven by a well-defined vision for enhanced security and strategic dominance. According to Umbra Synthetic Aperture Radar, SAR, imagery from September 2024, a staggering 59 DF-26 Transporter Erector Launchers, TELs, were spotted stationed at the Beijing Xinhang Electromechanical Equipment Factory. The imagery revealed that this stockpile of TELs alone could support up to 2 complete brigades, with each brigade comprising 36 TELs. These TELs, strategically located and ready for deployment, underscore China's intention to make a powerful statement on the world stage. Could the US possibly match this level of dedication and readiness? From what we have been seeing so far, it is highly unlikely that the US can. It seems like the military giant is slowing down while China is ramping up its production and development speeds every day, and they're faster than yesterday. Supporting these findings, the US Department of Defense, DoD, released a report earlier in the year titled Nuclear Challenges: The Growing Capabilities of Strategic Competitors and Regional Rivals. This report highlights the expansion of the PLARF's intermediate-range missile stockpile and warns of the rapid pace at which China is growing its missile capabilities. As China's military capabilities continue to grow, the DF-26's role as a critical asset in China's strategic toolkit becomes even clearer. With its potential to alter the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific, the DF-26 is far more than a missile. It is a statement of China's determination to protect its regional interests. The DF-26 was explicitly designed to execute precise strikes on both land and naval targets, specifically targeting US Navy aircraft carriers. The mobile nature of the missile launcher, combined with its long range, allows it to cover extensive distances, posing a distinct threat to enemy targets. The missile is produced by the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, CASC, and has already earned the notorious nickname Guam Express for its ability to reach US military assets on the island of Guam. This capability alone is enough to make any rival wary of China's expanding reach and the strategic foresight driving its military advancements. The development and deployment of the DF-26B is not just a mere enhancement in China's missile inventory, but a calculated approach to ensuring its defense against foreign threats. Brandon J. Weichert, a prominent commentator for the National Interest, recently noted that China has achieved a significant breakthrough with the DF-26B. He emphasized that this missile serves as China's primary anti-ship ballistic missile, ASBM system, designed specifically to counter the United States. Weichert pointed out that Beijing is not only capable of mass-producing these weapons, but can also deploy them rapidly in any conflict with the US in the Indo-Pacific. Imagine the impact of hundreds of DF-26Bs stationed across the region, each one representing a formidable defense line that US naval forces would find challenging to penetrate. China's strategic approach with the DF-26B isn't just theoretical. It's grounded in practical scenarios that show its effectiveness. In the vast waters of the Indo-Pacific, a single hit on an American aircraft carrier could tilt the scales in China's favor. Even more astounding is that China's inventory of DF-26Bs, potentially reaching 400 to 500 missiles, provides ample opportunities to strike successfully. Such odds would place US aircraft carriers in an unenviable position, with China holding multiple chances to succeed, where just one hit could be decisive. Former US Navy submarine commander Tom Shuggart reflected on this scenario, noting that in a high-stakes sea conflict, the PLA would not hesitate to trade a DF-26B, valued at around $20 million for a US destroyer or carrier, which costs billions. From an economic perspective alone, China's approach to defense demonstrates efficiency and a keen understanding of modern warfare. The economic difference is there, but keep in mind that aircraft carriers are the backbone of a navy, and losing just one of them can deal a huge blow to the military. And what's impressive is that China isn't focused on taking one down. It is highly focused on targeting any and every carrier that enters its territory, and that alone sends a message. The DF-26B's development and deployment are influenced by real-world lessons, notably the unfortunate fate of the Russian Navy's guided missile frigate Moskva. In April 2022, the Moskva, flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, was destroyed by a land-based missile strike, a costly lesson for Russia and a warning to other nations. This incident revealed the vulnerability of large warships, particularly to precision-guided missile systems. For the US Navy, which frequently operates in high-stakes regions, the DF-26B presents an even greater threat, showing the concept of a carrier killer. What strategic options would the US have in the face of such a formidable missile threat? One thing that history has taught us repeatedly is that China learns from global engagements and adapts accordingly, and the nation is extremely good at it. The DF-26B is a clear signature of China's impressive military strategy and its commitment to regional security. With the backing of the PLARF, this missile program represents China's belief in a strong defense, ensuring that its rivals must think twice before engaging in the Indo-Pacific. The sheer scale of China's missile production and the precision-focused design of the DF-26B provide a sense of security that traditional defense systems alone might not achieve. With much about China's significant increase in production of its deadly DF-26 aircraft killer missiles and why it's important covered, it is time to wrap this one up. If you have any topics in mind, comment below and we will cover.
Cool figure. Follow me.